Verizon time is now 3 p.m., so I'd like to call the monthly meeting of the Board of Supervisors to order and ask that Mr. Wayne Jesse lead us in prayer, followed by Matt Walker with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I'd like to thank you for giving us an opportunity to attend this meeting this evening, dear Lord. Let's pray for the sick and shut in, dear Lord. And also, let's pray for our President of the United States and guide him in the right direction, dear Lord. And let us make wise and just decisions as we conduct county business this evening. These and all the blessings in my Heavenly Father's name, amen.
Amen. Amen. Would all citizens of our nation rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now we'll look at the approval of the consent agenda, and I believe, Betty, you had a change for us?
I did. I would ask that to amend the agenda to add the electoral board members to the agency and staff reports after school matters to hear their request for a budget amendment.
Very good. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda with that change?
I so move.
Second.
Second.
If there's no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered.
And Mr. Chairman, we have one other change. I apologize. I think we discussed we probably need to move Mr. Taylor and the compensation study to regular
You're right.
agenda items.
Right.
Yes, sir.
That'll move from agency and staff reports to regular agenda.
And, Mr. Chairman, I believe we discussed 5A as well. Oh, you were moving
Yeah,
him down?
that was it.
Okay.
That was it. Okay.
Thank you. That was it.
Does the motion and the second still carry with these other two? We're good to go?
Yes.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to open the public comment period. Anybody would like to come forward, please come forward and state your name and address.
Hello, good afternoon, members of the board. I'm Angeline Frame. I bought Leafwood, which is the home right down the street, last March, and I have some grave concerns about speeding here in town. We have purchased this home not only to live there with our family, but also to host weddings there on the property. And since we moved in, I actually run my business from the home, so I'm there pretty much all the time, as is my husband. And I'm not exaggerating when I say every other car that drives past there is speeding, both directions. In excess, a lot of it is reckless driving. It's very concerning to us. We've almost been rear-ended several times pulling into our driveway. And, you know, what I question is, why is the speed limit in a residential business, area like this 35? I believe it should be 25. We have students walking to and from school. We have people walking their dogs, elderly people walking, people going back and forth to the post office. And we have observed, as I mentioned, cars, some of them doing 60 miles an hour. And I have contacted not only the local sheriff here, but also the state police several times, and to be told that it's a matter of funding and they don't have anyone to patrol this area, which I find rather astonishing. I would also, request and like to see, other than that speed limit possibly considered to be dropped, that there be some law enforcement showing a presence right here on this street. I believe if that happened, not only would you increase your revenue with speeding tickets, quite a few of them reckless driving, I think in time people would slow down if they see the presence of law enforcement. That's my belief. So that's what I'm presenting to you today. We're concerned also, of course, with the weddings that are going to be starting in our property. There's going to be a lot of people pulling in and out of that driveway. And if people continue to speed through town, I can foresee a lot of very serious accidents. I was told by the sheriff when I first contacted him that these were tourists. And after tourist season, we wouldn't see this problem. Well, actually, when there's heavy traffic, people are actually going the speed limit because they have no other choice. It's actually local people we've observed. It's every morning. It's all day long, but primarily it's when people are going to work in the morning, when they're coming home, and throughout the day, even trucks. You know, we've observed heavy tractor trailers, contractors, numerous work vans, you know, as well as cars speeding. Like I said, doing in excess of 60 miles an hour, a lot of them. Most of them every other, at least 12 miles over. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm Russ Perkinson. My sister and I own Prospect in Topping, Virginia, and some land that fronts on the Rappahannock between Lockleys and Back Creek. I'm not asking the board to do anything, just want to make you aware of a permit application that an oyster company has put in that's being considered by VMRC that would place 10 acres of exposed and unsightly, you might call it an eyesore, production structures close to their entire land that fronts the Rappahannock. We're extremely concerned with what it would do to the area, their families' use of the land, and the bay. I never in my life would have thought someone would propose a project such as this on the water in front of a riverland. I have a handout. I don't know if I can hand you a copy or not.
You can give
Okay.
it to us. And I'll pass it around.
Yep.
I'll bet.
I'll just show you some images of some other places where this system looks that's in the handout there. It's, you know, it's not real attractive looking. It's going to impede navigation for the use of the property by myself and my family. The applicant proposes a factory-intensive system of 9,000 posts and poles arranged in 288 rows, each as long as a football field. Alternatively, they said they might put in 4,300 rebar racks that would show above the surface that are 3 by 10 feet in size each, or over 2,100 high-profile 4 by 6 oyster floats. I have images of what these look like in the handouts coming around. This was my mother's land, a person some of you know cared very deeply for the county and for preserving the positive aspects of the character of the area. The proposal would drastically alter the character of the area for worse. From a personal perspective, it would take away some of their riparian land ownership rights and greatly restrict their access to the land, navigational access, and take away enjoyment of our property in the natural setting. This type of oyster production methods proposed, oysters are normally good for the bay. This type of factory production intensive would be detrimental to the river and the bay by killing off the beneficial bottom grasses that we'd work very hard to get the return to the area, and it due to massive nutrient reductions in the bay watershed. Thank you for your attention this afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I'm Derek Banks, and board. I'm Derek Banks, and I represent the Beverly Beach Association. That association was established in the early 40s by Dr. Tony and Professor Williams. And our concern is that the proposed project would negatively impact our land value. It also would impact the view, and I'm referring to the same project that Russ just discussed. It's VMRC permit number 17/1881. We feel very strongly that this would really impact our view, and it's going to also impact the grasses as well. This is more of an industrial site than a normal oyster, day-to-day oyster operation. And I can't see that we will allow an oyster factory in front of residential property. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name is E.G. Fleet, 3674 Grays Point Road. I can't say much more than what the two fellows in front of me said, other than I've been there 11 years, owned the property for like 15 or 16 years now. Already there are floats, not floats, but cages in the bottom, which they've, same folks have rented from the state. And I've witnessed no less this year than 6 boats go into there and run aground, stop right there on the spot. I haven't seen anyone get hurt, but there've been some damage to boats. There are a lot of kayakers in that area. A lot of, they come from the campgrounds. You'll see them come all the way around by the bridge. A lot of small boats, little sailboats and things coming through there in the past. Right now, they're very limited because they can't get through there already. My fear would be, I see boats at nighttime. If this is not marked, for one thing, they will come in and hang themselves because it's above the water. Now, this is another area that crabbing has picked up in that area. This year particularly, there's been more duck hunting in that area, and I don't know where the duck hunters are coming from, but it's an area of very natural area all up to that one side. And I don't know any of the landowners that are facing that right now from my house around to the bridge to the left of where we're looking. But there's a lot of homes there that this is the first phase they're talking about. There are 3 phases that would go all the way to the bridge. Now, if we think in Middlesex County and Lancaster County that the towers going across with Dominion Power was bad, wait till you see these pictures come around. This affects everybody in the river. I mean, you're going to see it. I haven't seen one really, but I've seen the same pictures you folks have. We were notified of this. The first gentleman, Russ, was notified right before Christmas, and he was the only person in the area notified. Had he not gotten down here and gotten with us, nobody would have known it. It would be through. We have already gone to VMRC, and we have letters of protest with them now. I think there's 9 letters in, and we've got numerous signatures ready to go again. If they pursue this, we will go to Newport News. It's a land value issue with me. It's a view for anyone living there. I don't think anybody in this room would want something like that in their front yard. It's an industry for profit, that's for sure. Nobody loves orchards to eat more than me. But this is a little bit different situation. Like I say, it's the industry, the nutrient area of it all. I can see already with the little boats coming in there all the time now, the grasses, my grasses already where they're doing it are disappearing. They just started coming back a few years ago, about 5 years ago. But I can see that changing already. So that's where we stand at this point. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is John Fahrenholt. I'm from Hartfield, Virginia. I am here once again to talk to you about the boat tax issue and its implications on the marine industry. I and others are experiencing still a downturn in this industry, mainly on the large, more expensive boats that are no longer in the county. They have and continue to exit our marinas, our boat yards, for the tax-free zones that surround Middlesex County. And it's having an impact not only on our business, our number of people that we employ that live throughout this county, in all districts, and it's a big factor that's affecting us. It's also affecting the assessed values of our marine businesses. In your packet, you'll receive a report, the final report from the Board of Equalization, that stipulated that there was a decrease in the county's property value of $3.3 million. Of that, 2.5 or almost 2.6 million was from just 4 marinas. During that process, which I was one, we were pushing for even further reductions from the Board of Equalization, greater than another $1 million from this number. We were unsuccessful at that avenue, but I know we will be back requesting further reductions in our assessment. Okay, this is not just affecting the marine industry, it's affecting residential properties along the waterfront as well. The county spent over $200,000 for the assessor to assess the land values in the county, and it's a negative number. And that's going to have an implication on all residents of this county. Okay? If property values are not going up, therefore, we're going to have to pay a higher rate. And the waterfront properties are the most valuable, one of the most valuable properties that the county has. And if that is stagnant or declining, therefore, the other residents that don't live on the waterfront will have to then pay more in the real estate rate to continue to keep this county functioning at the current level that it is. So I strongly request that the boat tax issue become an issue again. It is one that is affecting everybody in this county, from employment to the assessed values to the money that this county makes. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
My name is Park Terrell. I reside at 185 Regent Point Road. I'm here today representing Regent Point Marina and would like to echo the items that were just mentioned. A lot of times boating is looked at, particularly in the larger, more expensive vessels, of people coming into our area. But already to date, first time at our marina, we've had to reduce our boatyard staff by 2 people. We hope to be able to bring those back. But the bottom line is, it's not just the boat tax, it's the amount of industry, services, support services, all that goes with it, with people coming to our area to enjoy the waterfront, to enjoy the time here. Lost revenues, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I know that I can look at revenue reports and see that sales tax and other things that indicate food sales and clothes sales and retail, all those things that are being reduced. So in like manner, I would like to ask you, gentlemen, ladies, please look at this, not just the immediate impact for some people being forgiven of a boat tax, most of which can pay. They wouldn't own a boat if they didn't, but they've gone other places. They've housed their vessels across the river. They even advertise across the river, please come over here because there's no boat tax. And the bottom line, in my opinion, is we need to look at the big picture. What is the Chesapeake Bay? What has the river been for all the years? People for all their lives have been coming here for a reason, a destination. And I'd hate to think that we would close the doors to people that want to come and spend money. And if they're going to come and go somewhere, let's do what we can to bring them here to spend the money versus across the river. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Could I ask his name again?
It's Park, P as in Paul, Park Terrell, Terrell. Hail from New Kent County back in the 1600s.
Thank you, sir.
Is there anyone else? Seeing none, we will close the public comment period and move into reports from constitutional officers. You have on pages 45 through 47 the treasurer report only. I believe the next is Sheriff Bushy wants to talk to us about some grants.
Good afternoon. I've come before the board. As you know, when we hired Eileen, I did it for a purpose because I knew she could get us some money, and she's going to run the 911 center a lot better than we had in the past. So before you, she's been working diligently, and she has one grant that's FYI 19 PSAP.
Fiscal year 19 starts in July.
Which starts July 1st, and that's for $150,000 to Middlesex County to help fund our radio system in the 911 system there. she would be able to purchase some new equipment that you wouldn't have to fund later on because ours is getting outdated. And that is, there's no match to that, so that is technically free money. But we have to get permission from you to go forward. Next one, grant, is the Virginia E911 Service Board awarded her grant number ID 67, which is for $2,000, and that's for training. For training on the...
Any training they have to do with 911 dispatch.
So that also, there is no match to that the county would have to pay, so that's free money. So this is what we've been looking forward since I've been your sheriff. I think we've now, in all of our grants, we've reached over $500,000 of free money that we've searched for, that we brought into the county to buy equipment and to bring forward. And, you know, we purchased through the, so the board and the citizens wouldn't have to pay. We actually purchased 8 police cars. So we're going to keep moving forward so that we can take a pressure off the taxpayers. And that's it, unless you have any other questions.
Do we approve this by consent, or do we need to?
I would recommend you vote on this,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Chair will entertain a motion to move forward with these grants.
I'd like to make that motion.
Second. A motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
All right.
Appreciate
Have a good day.
Good job.
All righty. Moving down to agency and staff reports. Department of Transportation, Joyce.
Good afternoon, Chairman of the Board, members, County Administration. I have a quick update because the month of January, we were busy working on snow removal and patching potholes, which we're still doing. But currently, we are working in the lower end of the county with some ditching projects that we've had on our schedule, trying to get those taken care of. Our crews are patching potholes on the primaries and secondaries, and when the weather is good, we're actually getting asphalt for some bigger patches that we want to do out there. There's plenty of them out there. And our limbing contractor is in the county, so if anyone sees tree trimming, we do have our cycle where we are trying to get the entire county limbed over a 5 or 6 year period. So that's been undertaken as well this month. Upcoming, we will see us out on Route 33 just past Stormont here. We're going to be repairing one of the cross pipes under Route 33. It shouldn't disrupt traffic, but just wanted to let you know because that is a major highway and people will wonder what we're doing. And we're going to clean it and do some repairs. And also, the secondary 6-year plan hearings are coming up, so I kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. If you have any thoughts for projects or ideas or things that you'd like to consider, hopefully I can get on your agenda sometime in between your own budget cycle before June to get that taken care of. So I don't have any other updates. If you have something for me, I'd be glad to take it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Some months ago, there was a fatality on Route 33 in the neighborhood of Chick Cove.
Mhm.
And a constituent asked if something could be done about the speed limit, and I think a speed study was going to be done. Do you know what the status of that is?
I do believe that they did not recommend any changes in the speed limit through the
Okay.
area.
I would have guessed the same, but
Yeah.
the constituent contacted me last night, and I hadn't heard, so I needed to ask.
May I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Is there a cost associated with those studies, or is that part of VDOT doing business and responding to constituent concerns?
We do those in response to the requests from the citizens or the board.
Should we be entertaining something similar in Saluda, given the concerns that have been expressed by citizens about the speeding in Saluda?
What concerns? They've not
Oh,
been
you
brought
might
to
not
my
have been here.
attention.
We've had one constituent point out speeds in excess of 60 miles an hour through Saluda, coming up to the...
I can address that. This lady, she contacted me when she moved here. She's the only complaint we've had in the whole area. We did go out. What she doesn't understand, I think she comes from a big city, and she thinks we can generate revenue by writing people tickets. And I explained to her that when we write tickets, the revenue goes to the state. So there's no incentive for that. We don't have the manpower to do that because we have 2 deputies on the road to cover our whole county at one time. So we have duties where we handle mental health issues, we handle civil process, and we work on cases. And with 2 deputies on the road, we just can't sit up and run traffic zones. So what we do is the sheriffs in most jurisdictions in the Commonwealth, they have the state police do that. And I explained that to her. She contacted state police, they said they would look at it. When we did it, she said they were going 65 miles an hour from the corner here to her home. I can barely get up to 65 miles an hour from there. So I told her that. And I said, when we did it, some cars are going 10, 15 miles over the speed limit. And we get more complaints about it during when our tourists are coming in. Now she's telling me it's when people are going to work and after work. So it keeps changing. I try to express to her that the manpower, if you guys want to give me a traffic control and pay for it, I'll be more than happy to write tickets all day long. I don't think these citizens will like it if I start writing tickets to everybody going 5 miles over the speed limit. I don't think the judges will like it. And then your economic business is gone. So there's a 2-way deal on that. And I told her she can contact you, Joyce, if she wants to do a study on that. And that's what we usually do. And I told her to contact each one of you about it, and she did. And she's exercising her right. She has the right to say that. She has a business. But as far as I remember, we had one person hit there in that street, I think it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
He was coming across the road.
Yeah, the gentleman that owned the thing. And he had some medical conditions and somebody hit him. Otherwise, we have not had any complaints in that whole area. I get more complaints in other areas in this county, and I just don't see putting a deputy there when they could be doing their job and sitting writing tickets and the revenue doesn't come back to us. It goes to the state. So unless you want to give me hire some deputies, I'll write tickets all day. That's what the public wants.
I got a question though. Sometimes if you got a car that's not using a lot of times, if you see a deputy car just parked there for 1 or 2 days, when you see a car, you automatically slow down. I was just saying, if you have problems like that, sometimes you could pull a dummy car like you do, I say here sometime in front of the courthouse to see. That's only if you have those problems.
But we're going to talk about that because we don't even have enough cars to keep our fleet going.
Okay.
And we're going to bring that up. And that's at the budget time. That's another issue. But she asked me about getting one of the signs that says your speed is.
No.
Okay, folks, you know how much a sign is that says your speed is?
$15,000.
Thank you. $15,000. Anybody want to give me a sign for $15,000? I'll put one up. No volunteers. That's what I'm up against.
Right.
Joyce will do it for a little bit. She has one, but it travels around somewhere.
It was broken and dead.
So that's where we're at.
This is the state of the
Okay.
Commonwealth.
It was probably 20 years old. You said
Sorry to jump in.
Yeah, I remember.
You've got a gun, you can, the enforcement part of it, but as, for VDOT's perspective, when we do a study, we take in the average speed of the travelers, we look at the crash rates, we look at the vicinity to see if there have been any major changes, say if you've got a huge development that came in and added more traffic. So from my perspective, looking at the area, you probably would not warrant an increase in the speed a decrease in the speed. If anything, you may show that traffic's actually moving faster without having crashes. You'd have the opposite effect with a study. That's just my opinion of, those situations where people want the speed reduced in areas where it's, there's not any changes or any type of accident history and things, so.
Yeah, and just to be clear, it's your opinion that I was soliciting, and the sheriff's is welcome as well. I'm just the supervisor. I need to know what you guys think when I hear from constituents.
Well, I put her on to you guys.
I didn't hear from anyone, so I appreciate you letting me know. That's not a problem, but,
Mr. Chairman, Joyce, if I may,
okay.
just to reiterate one point you just said, a speed study could recommend an increase.
Good.
If the speed
Well,
study
you
warrants
could
that.
leave it the same, or you could show that the average speed is
So
X,
it may
and
be one
that's
of those
more than what
situations-
they're doing now, so we
Right.
probably wouldn't raise it, but,
Maybe
that-
one
that-
of the,
based
maybe
on
one of
our-
those cases where be careful what you ask for, it may show the opposite of what you think it may
Yeah,
show.
and we could explain that and do those things. But we do, if there's a huge study or something that the county has that's a need for them, they do have some engineering money in the secondary six-year plan that you can use if you need to check some traffic things out for developments or road improvements and things like that. But usually when people ask, we do those just through our office. So, anything else?
Any other questions?
That was interesting discussion.
We should have more of them.
Joyce, thank you.
You're welcome. Y'all have a good week.
Thanks, Joy.
Moving on to school matters. Dr. Peter Gratz. Dr. Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Walker, Ms. Muncy. This is going to be probably a less interesting conversation. The federal money that we receive comes by way of several title grants, and the federal budget is done on a different schedule than ours, a different fiscal year. So we typically spend the fall coming back and asking you to appropriate federal money in those title grants. It's been revised from what they asked us to project in the summer, around October and November, when they actually give us the real amounts. This is a situation where the federal government has revised an old title grant. So it's not one of the ones that we've just received and that I've been asking you to appropriate over the past few months. This is a 16-17 grant. The good news is that we're receiving some money. The bad news is it's $400, but we'll take the $400. I don't know why they don't just roll that into the new grant, but this is the process that they ask us to use, so I'm asking you to appropriate $410 to be spent this year in the Title I grant that's going to expend this year, the 16-17 grant.
We have the request. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second it.
Have a motion and a proper second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Dr. Pete?
Thank you.
$410, I believe it's 50-some cents. too.
Yes, we'll spend every cent. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Betty, I believe this is where we've amended the agenda to add the electoral board budget request. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And who was Ray coming up to do that? Or?
Mel.
You have the option to take action now or after the presentation or later in the action items, you could take action.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Mel Placilla. I'm the Electoral Board Secretary. And this coming spring, we're going to have a primary election. We believe there'll be a primary for both parties. And in assessing our budget, which was appropriated for this fiscal year, we found that we needed an additional $2,500 for personnel, the people who work at the election, those folks who were there for 12 or 14 hours, and another $1,500 for postage. In addition, in past elections, we've noticed in Urbana at the firehouse, there's some difficulty or potential difficulty for handicapped folks to actually get to the polling place. So we've included in this request $1,500 to purchase what I'll call mats, which would allow a person in a wheelchair easier access from the gravel parking lot, and a bell, which would ring inside the polling place to allow someone to call an officer of election out to allow them to vote from their car. So we would respectfully request that you approve our budget amendment of $6,500. Thank you. Any questions? Or did I get the number right? 5,500, sorry.
55.
Yeah.
On page 96, if you want to look at that. 97, excuse me.
Betty, you said we had the option of approving that now or when?
During the action items.
What is your pleasure, gentlemen?
We can do that.
I think we can do it now.
I'll make a motion with budget transfer request, $5,500.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
This is actually money coming out of the contingency money we had.
Correct. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. So
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to social services, we have a report only, pages 49 and 50 in your packet. And Betty, I believe you're going to introduce item D.
Last fall, a contract was entered into between the county and Interos Design to look into improvements for providing handicap access to the Woodward building. Staff met with Mr. Ensminger, Gil Ensminger, in December, and then he subsequently came back and took measurements to come up with some suggested designs and estimates for providing that access. And he is here today to present some proposals
Very good.
for consideration. Gil Ensminger.
Thank you, Ms. Munson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. We did provide a study to the county to evaluate potential locations for handicapped accessibility to the Woodward building. And we've presented 2 different potential locations and 3 different options for how to approach that. And if I can have the next slide, please. The 2 different locations we've looked at, one is represented in the top left photo of this slide, which shows a potential location of putting the tower lift element in the 2 windows that are just in front of the arcade, in front of that arch on the left there. The access would come up the side of the building in that location and enter through that window into the 2nd floor of the building. That was the first location we looked at. And the second location was actually to replace the existing lift that's attached to the courthouse building, which is older and smaller and not as accessible as a new lift would be, to provide a lift that would provide access to both buildings in one single lift. So those are the options we'll present to you today. The next slide, please. The first option shows the lift near the arcade, providing access just to the administration building. We would have an elevator vestibule that would be accessible from the arcade element. You'd enter through a glass doorway into that vestibule and be provided access up a lift to the 2nd floor of the building. The left-hand slide shows the 2nd floor with that sort of elevator vestibule that would then enter into a new hallway to provide access into the 2nd floor corridor. There would be some reconfiguration of some office walls to make that work on the interior of the 2nd floor as well. This would provide accessibility to the 2nd floor, but would not address some connection accessibility between the 2 buildings, which some of the other options do show. The next option, the next slide shows some 3-dimensional views of what that might look like. These are very early conceptual plans. We haven't developed any of these designs fully. We just wanted to show you some diagrammatic options of how it would look. So that shows the 3-dimensional massing inside of the courtyard and the space that it would occupy inside that space. The next option shows a connection between the 2 buildings. This option shows replacing the existing elevator or lift shaft attached to the side of the courthouse building with a new elevator lift that would be larger in footprint, provide greater accessibility. It would have 2 stops. One stop would enter the courthouse building at a slightly higher elevation, and the other stop would enter into a kind of a bridge element that would join the courthouse building to the administration building. That bridge element would not only provide the handicapped accessibility between the 2 buildings, but it would provide a direct link or connection for staff to pass from one building to the other building without having to go down the stairs and back up the stairs. So there's some convenience there for that. Same situation where you would enter into a ground floor vestibule, provide access into the lift, and then exit the lift on the 2nd floor to enter either of the 2 buildings.
Why would you have to do away with, why couldn't you just use the elevator that you've got now? I know it's small, but.
It's not set up for 2 stops, and it wouldn't really be possible to retrofit that elevator for 2 stops. The 2 buildings are at 2 different levels, and so by having a new one that would have 2 stops, one at a higher level, one at a lower level, we could provide the access to both buildings. The existing one is very small and older, and so providing a larger one, a newer one that has the 2 stops would provide that greater accessibility.
And you can adapt the 2-stop to the old one?
I don't believe it would be cost effective to do that. We haven't researched that option, but I believe that one is older, and I don't believe it would be possible to do that. But that is something we could check on with the manufacturer.
What is the difference in height between the second floor here and the second floor over there? If it's a foot or something, I've got to imagine there'd be a ramp possible.
I believe it's more like 24 inches or a little bit higher, so it's 1 foot of horizontal distance you have to travel for every inch, so it'd be about 24 feet of ramp.
When we looked at that scenario before, we very quickly determined in order to make a ramp work between the buildings, we'd probably have to come out the storage room and ramp it on top of the roof in front of the registrar's office, and then continue to ramp it into this area in order to get the desired grade, I guess. So it's quite a bit of ramp.
Not to be flip, but I think we just found from another department within our government that for $1,500 we can use mats and a bell to take care of the same issue. What am I missing?
This is on the second floor.
I mean, I think we, for the amount of money we're looking at, I've got to believe that the very willing and capable staff of the administration would be willing to accommodate that occasional request, but I'm just trying to save the taxpayers some dollars here.
And these are some 3-dimensional views, again, that show that connection. So you'd have that second floor bridge and some sort of entry vestibule on the ground floor. And then the third final option we've looked at is closer to what Mr. Walker just suggested, where you'd have a connection between the 2 buildings, as was mentioned earlier, putting the lift in the front of the building, as you saw in the first option, providing connection to the administration building or connection through a walkway, kind of a second floor porch element across to the historic courthouse building. And then you can see the 3-dimensional views of that option in the next slide. So on the front of the building, you would change the pitch of the roof over the arcade to provide a connection to a covered walkway area that would provide the connection between the 2 buildings. This one is a good bit more expensive and more construction, but it would provide that enclosed connection between the 2 buildings.
Have you got any guesses on what the cost of all this?
We do, and that's the next slide after this one. So
speak briefly about the different lift types.
Yes.
I want to make sure the board understands the different types of lifts.
yeah, we wanted to let you know what options there are for lifts for this access. The lift on the far left is essentially what you might have seen in other buildings, which is a handicapped chair lift. It's often just provided for access between a stage and the first floor and a stage or platform area for performing arts, or exterior connection between an entry that's just a few steps up and grade. It has a smaller cab size. It's about 42 inches by 58 inches, and its capacity for weight that it can hold is about 750 pounds. The typical cost of just the lift itself is in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000, and the image on the left shows how that could work. It's not allowed for access between first floor and second floor for new construction, but in an altered building, subject to approval by the local building official, you can provide this type of lift for that access. It is a manual operation only, so a current code-compliant elevator has automatic operation. You come in, you push a button, and it automatically goes up, doors open, and you exit the elevator. A lift like this, someone has to manually push the button for it to move, and you actually manually have to physically open or close the gate. So not as sophisticated or as much control as you would have over a modern elevator. The option in the center is a Lula. It's limited use, limited access elevator. It's a little bit closer to a commercial elevator, full elevator. It's cab size, a little bit larger, 51 inches by 51 inches. Load capacity is higher, 1,400 pounds, and the cost of just the lift itself is in the neighborhood of $45,000 to $55,000.
Gil, is that similar to what we have now?
It is, except for what you have now. It's more of a residential elevator. You have to physically slide the gate. A Lula, which is suitable for commercial application, has automatic operation just as an elevator door does. The doors will open and close automatically, and you just push a button and it goes up. So it's a little bit closer to the controls of a full elevator, but doesn't have a lot of the other features and is not as large and does not have the load capacity. And then the option on the far right is a full elevator, and this is what you would typically see in a new commercial building. This is the smallest elevator cab they have that meets code and accessibility requirements. The interior cab size is 51 inches by 68 inches. Its capacity is 2,100 pounds, and the typical cost for a two-stop elevator is between $75,000 and $100,000, and it's just for the elevator itself. So looking at some potential costs of these options, again, I've got the options shown on the far left of the slides, just to refresh your memory of which option is which. And then the columns in the spreadsheet show the relative cost between option 1, 2, and 3. These are, I would say, relative costs from one option to another. We didn't do full designs. We don't have full specifications for each of these options, but we believe these are reasonable, accurate cost for the range that you might expect for this type of installation. Option 1, which as you recall is just the handicapped, it's the lift in the front of the building. For the Lula elevator, which was that middle range, a little bit more than just a handicapped lift, not quite as elaborate as a full elevator, we're estimating the cost to be about $267,000. If you just did the handicapped lift, it would drop it down to about $215,000, and then a full elevator would be more like $320,000. And then option 2, which was the bridge and replacing the existing lift attached to the side of the courthouse building, we would estimate the Lula lift to be about $308,000, the handicapped chair lift to be about $248,000, and a full elevator to be about $369,000. And then the third option, which is the more elaborate connection between the existing building, the admin building, and the historic courthouse building on the front, the Lula we estimate to be about $412,000, the handicapped chairlift to be about $332,000, and the full elevator $495,000. Again, these are just a relative range of costs that might be expected for this type of construction. It might be able to be done a little bit cheaper, or if it became very elaborate in finishes and materials, it could be more expensive.
Do these prices include your $50,000?
No, they don't. These are just the construction costs.
Okay.
And ours is just a design fee.
I understand.
Yes, sir. This is just construction cost. And so that gives you an idea of what the potential cost might be and what some of the design options are for a lift to provide handicapped accessibility from the ground floor to the second floor.
So our total cost for the most expensive one, for instance, would be $550.
Roughly, yes, sir.
Roughly.
Yes, sir. And that would be a full commercial elevator.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Plus whatever, that doesn't include what renovations we would have to do to the office building.
It does. Yeah, these estimates are factoring in the modifications. Now, they're the modifications that are required for the lift. If there's other things you want to do for reconfiguring those spaces for other purposes, it doesn't. But the access and corridor changes and wall changes, this includes that.
What's the warranty on these elevators?
I believe they're usually in the neighborhood of about 10 years, but they're elevators like this and any type require an annual service contract. So you inspect and service them annually. So as long as they're maintained and serviced, they typically last much longer than that.
What sort of operating expense would you identify for these kinds of elevators, or annual recurring expense to maintain them?
I don't know those exact numbers, but I would say the inspection service is probably around $1,000 for the inspection, then plus whatever maintenance it might require at that time.
If it were your building and your money, what's the most cost-effective, best option in your opinion?
I think there's a definite advantage to having the connection between the two buildings at the second floor. I think providing that access just for daily efficiency of your operations, there's a significant advantage to that. And so I say option 2 is the option from my point of view that makes the most sense. If you were to pursue any of these options, I would say option 2 has some definite advantages, not just for handicapped accessibility, but for staff operations and efficiency. So, and then in terms of what option to pick, I would say either the Lula or the full elevator, depending on what your budget would allow. I think just the chairlift option has some downsides to it for safety and operation, the aspects of its manual operation and less controllability of that, I think, presents some potential problems.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
All right, Betty, I believe item E is yours also, Resource International.
Today we have Robert Hunley and Mike Fiore from Resource International to talk about the landfill issue.
We do the Eureka first.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, county administrator, and staff. Again, my name is Bob Hunley, and I'm here with Resource International. We were here back this past fall to talk to you about the landfill, and we wanted to bring you some more information regarding an instrument that could be useful in the pursuit of termination of post-closure care at your facility. As you know, you're in post-closure care now. That period can last as long as there are constituents being sampled in the groundwater. And so we have tried to take as aggressive an approach as possible to see how we can shorten that period. So just briefly going through the report that you have in front of you, I'd call your attention to the bottom of page 1 where it says VDEQ requirements. Just want to go briefly over the requirements that VDEQ requires for the use of a Eureka. Eureka stands for Unified Environmental Covenants Act, and this is basically like a environmental covenants that you would place over the property that would say to future users of that land that it shall be used for nothing. There can't be anything built on it, certain water restrictions, those types of things. So I'll just go briefly through the requirements that DEQ puts on the use of a Eureka. The first one is that the site must be within a corrective action program, which was what the Middlesex landfill is currently in. So that you comply with. The second one, groundwater at the site may not be used as a source of drinking water, and you can limit that to a specific aquifer if you need to. So that's something that would result in a Eureka being placed over a piece of land. The third one, the limits of any previously identified groundwater contamination plume created by the site facility must be within the facility's property boundary, and we'll get into that at the end when I show you the map of the facility. Basically, if you have groundwater that has been, groundwater constituents that have been detected in your groundwater monitoring wells, that plume that's created by those monitoring well constituents cannot exceed beyond your facility boundary. And then the fourth requirement is that the facility must exhibit no surface water contamination. So the stream, for instance, that you have on the southern end of the landfill property, if you have any surface water contamination that results from monitoring of those surface water points, that would be a negative. So then we jump to the next page, and if we'll scroll down to current Eureka status. And so that just goes back over those 4 requirements from DEQ and shows you where you are with respect to the Middlesex landfill. Again, you are in the corrective action program, so you would qualify there. You would establish a requirement that the site not be used as a source of drinking water, and you don't have that problem there as well because there's no one there on a drinking water well. And so you could agree to that requirement if you were going to use the Eureka. Number 3, the contamination plume. We'll get into some specifics about that, but right now what we're seeing is that there are some constituents that are showing a decline, a trend of declining concentration, and there are others that are showing an increase, and I'll get to that on the last map. And then the 4th item, and just these items here, A through E, talk about the things that we're doing to try and deal with the constituents that we found at the landfill. Redeveloping, letter A talks about redeveloping a well to remove false positives. That was successful at the upgrading well where we were having some false positives with respect to some metals. So that well was redeveloped. We've resampled it. We don't have those metals in that well anymore. Replacing program wells whose location and construction may be contributing to false positives. Again, we had a well down close to the swamp, which is referred to as NES2. That well was a hand-augered well. I think we spoke about that at the last meeting back in the fall, and we were talking about possibly replacing that well. That well was replaced with a drilled well on December 22nd and has been sampled. We do not have the results back from that sampling event yet. They should be in this week. So we're hopeful that those results will show a much cleaner well than what we had been getting from the earlier hand-augered well. Letter C talks about resampling redeveloped wells. I mentioned 9R, that's the upgradient well. We were successful with that one. Reviewing improvements to the gas system to maintain compliance status. That is simply talking about the fact that in addition to groundwater for termination post-closure care, you also have to deal with gas, landfill gas. And so Mr. Blake has been very helpful in putting together some improvements to that system so that we're not having any exceedances of the gas probes. And then finally, we talk about the Eureka on letter E. If we can just scroll up to the map there, Mr. Walker. Just would like to show the, and we can go down to the southern boundary there. So each of those boxes represents the constituents that we're dealing with in the various wells. And the constituents are labeled green if there's a declining trend, and red or rose if there's an increasing trend. So you see and then the one over on the my far right is NES2. That I grade that out because that well has been replaced with NES2R. So we hope that those constituents will not be seen in the new well, but we don't have those results yet. With respect to the declining or the decreasing trends, those are good signs for us in terms of the use of a Eureka. DEQ will take a look at any trend that's going down and say, okay, if you're in a declining trend with these, we don't have to see them at 0, but we have to see that it's declining, and it cannot go past your property boundary. So each of those boxes represents a monitoring well where you've had a constituent or an exceedance. If you scroll over to the eastern side, the western side, I'm sorry, to the Thacker residence, former Thacker residence area. You've got 2 there, 1,1 DCA contaminant constituent readings that are in a decline, and you've got the former Thacker residence, which creates a new property boundary for you. So going in that direction, you probably would be in great shape as far as the Eureka is concerned. But
where is the old Thacker well?
basically just, I guess it'd be just southwest of where that box is on the Thacker residence, right in that general vicinity.
Where
his pointer is. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. And so the Eureka is something that, may be helpful to you, but at this point, currently, with the increasing trends that you have on some of the southern boundary wells, we don't believe that it's something that you could implement right away, at least. It is certainly something that I think you should consider long-term. And we put in, I think, if you can scroll back up, Mr. Walker, for the summary. And we just suggest that you continue to look at the results that we get in our sampling. Again, in your case, you're only sampling groundwater twice a year. So we just sampled in December. We'll be due to sample again in June. So looking at the results of the sampling event from June, we'll know better whether you are changing any of those trends to declining from increasing, and we'll be able to better give you an estimate of whether the Eureka is something to think about. The only other thing I would say is that the boundary on your southern end obviously goes right down to the creek or to the swamp in some places. So adding additional land to your facility would also be something to consider at some future point. But obviously, if you've got constituents that are not going down right on your property line, that makes it difficult to place a Eureka on the property. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have with respect to the Eureka.
Well, I got a question about your wells.
Yes, sir.
When you dig in your wells, that's off the landfill.
Yes, sir.
Trash. In other words, you're digging a.
It's supposed to be. Yes, sir.
Because I was just thinking, if you're digging on it and stirring up contaminant and going down.
Exactly.
That's why I just asked that question. The
Right.
southern end is off the trash site.
Yes, sir.
It's on county land.
The department requires that you be as close as possible to the edge of waste when you install these wells for the initial sampling. If you look on that map, you'll see where we have an NES3 and an NES2. That stands for nature and extent. What that means is those wells were installed to see how far down from the edge of the landfill any constituent may have migrated. So if we have a plume of contamination, that will show up in those NES wells. And so since you don't see a box around NES3, that means we didn't get any constituent hits in NES3. So that was a great sign there. We're hoping to see a similar result with this new well that we put in for NES2, since that was a poorly constructed well from the beginning. We think with the newer well, we may see some better results there. But again, if you look just at MW10, you see how close MW10 is to, which is on the western side, is how close that is to the property boundary. So you do have some issues there in trying to deal with the constituent increases there and implementing a Eureka with it being that close to the boundary. Now, if you added land, then that would be a different discussion. But right now, what we're dealing with is a cadmium and cobalt increasing trend there, and so unless we see some decreasing trends with those two constituents, then it makes it hard to put a Eureka on the site.
What's the ideal number to get from under DEQ on closing the landfill?
Right, so they require that you don't have any groundwater protection standard exceedances. The Eureka is a way to say to them, even though we have a groundwater protection standard exceedance, if it's on a downward trend, and we say we're going to put a covenant on the piece of land so that it's not going to be used for anything in the future, that's a way to expedite closure or termination of post-closure care. But until we reach the point of a declining trend on some of these constituents, we're not really allowed to go that route.
And you're still going up in cadmium and
Cobalt.
And cobalt.
Yes, sir. We took a look at, and we can get you a copy of those trends if you'd like, but we took a look at each of the trends. Some of them are definitely declining. The greens are definitely declining. Some of the rose-colored ones are increasing. Some of them not so much, but that could be changed if we got another couple of readings that were below GPS, groundwater protection standards, then they would definitely turn into declining trends.
And you're trying to oxidize, the new attempt that you're making is to oxidize those contaminants.
Well, I think Mr. Fiore is going to speak to another opportunity that we have with respect to that. I think that's what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
But yes, that is an opportunity to look at a different approach to termination of post-closure care. Do you want to talk about that now? We go back to the aerobic landfill.
One question before you do that.
Yes, sir.
You're monitoring every 6 months, and you've seen the trend lines. Are you thinking we're June or December away from having Eureka as an option, or do you think it is more likely long-term?
I think it's probably longer term than that. Certainly, if every time we get a reading below groundwater protection standards, it adds to the declining trend. But we probably are not at a point where one sampling event will put us in green throughout. Oh, yeah.
In addition to that, because you're in corrective action plan, one of the stipulations of correction plan is you have to have 3 years of declining data before you can get out of correction action. And so you still have, from this point forward, a minimum of 3-year window.
Thank you for that.
We had mentioned this very briefly at our last meeting, and you are in a situation with this landfill where you are watching. You're monitoring, and every quarter, every result, you look and see, well, how you did. It's like a report card. And right now, the report card keeps coming up the same thing. We have some improvements, but you don't have other improvements. And that's what we're doing. We're passively watching and hoping that every report card is better. And it may be getting better, but we can't tell. So we're kind of in a passive mode, and that's part of the problem with post-closure care when it was first envisioned decades ago. And this aerobic concept is another idea. It's an active idea. It's a way to get in control, but it may not necessarily be the best option. But an aerobic landfill basically changes the concept. You have basically a landfill which is a pile and cover. You pile the waste in, you cover it with soil, and you leave it there. This is the way most landfills were developed over the last 30, 40, 50 years, because it was least cost, capital cost, and it was a familiar operation for most landfills. What happens is when you cover waste up in this manner, you create an anaerobic decomposition process where the bacteria, in the absence of oxygen, basically chew up the waste. But what happens is they produce acid conditions in the landfill. They produce methane gas, and they produce liquid. And this liquid is characterized as leachate. Leachate is what's getting in the ground and basically contaminating the groundwater. And the gas is permeating, and that's one of the reasons why we're monitoring for gas, and you have a gas extraction system. Now, in some landfills, this is operation is such that the environment and the groundwater situations and the way the landfill waste was produced the environment handles it, and you don't have necessarily the same contaminant issues that you're experiencing. And over 10 years, 15 years, things seem to quiet down, settle out, your monitoring wells are fine, and you get released. It doesn't happen in most cases. And so consequently, the nature of the landfill, how wet it is, what's going on in the landfill really controls the end point. And in a lot of landfills, you may not be getting very active composition. Very common, if people go back and dig in landfills and they find newsprint that is the same as it was when it was put in there. That means you're not getting very active decomposition, and so that's extending the period of time, because as your waste slowly decomposes, the landfill starts falling in on itself, and then you have more waste decomposition, and it just extends for a long period of time. The aerobic process basically is trying to change that with the opportunity to aggressively stimulate the biodecomposition that's going on in the landfill by using aerobic concepts. You add air to the system, you change the bacteria from anaerobic to aerobic, and these have certain impacts. Number one, they create more neutral conditions in the landfill. The time for decomposition is substantially shorter by a factor of 20 times faster. You don't create methane gas. You produce CO2 and water vapor, and the other thing is it's a net user of liquid, so it doesn't generate quantities of leachate to impact the groundwater. So those are some of the elements. The other thing is, because of the neutral conditions, you don't leach the metals like we're seeing in the landfill, or leaching metals out of the soils that are being shown in constituents. So there's several different factors. You create a stabilized landfill much faster, and then you can get out of termination. I mean, you can terminate post-closure care. Next slide.
Why didn't we do this years ago?
I think the reason is because, number one, everybody was committed themselves to anaerobic landfills because they were low-cost, capital cost alternatives. That was pretty much, an aerobic landfill is not an inexpensive operation, but it's a sustainable operation, meaning you could create an aerobic landfill where you can operate one cell, fill it up, create another cell next to it, fill that up. By the time this one starts percolating, you start injecting air and creating the aerobic conditions. You do a third cell. By that time, you start preparing the fourth cell and mining this cell, so that at the point when you get to the fourth cell, you can go back to the first cell and you don't ever change your footprint, and you operate on a continuing basis. This was pretty high tech back 40 years ago, and people didn't want to do that.
We weren't trying to harvest any of the methane gas.
Well, no, but that was one of the features. People felt that was a very valuable commodity. Unfortunately, I think we found that most landfills were too small in size to make it of any value, and I think the industry got on the wrong track, and part of that was driven by low capital costs. So the photograph on your screen shows you kind of what you do with an unlined landfill and trying to convert it to an aerobic landfill. You you inject air into the landfill through wells. This air basically starts the process of going from anaerobic to aerobic. You have to have exhaust vents so that the airflow and the gases that are released by the aerobic activity and the water vapor are released out into the atmosphere. So that creates your opportunity to get rid of liquid. And that's basically it. It's a relatively simple in concept process. The other reason why you have to have the exhaust vents is you have to release the heat as well. Now, you do have to deal with moisture in landfills, aerobic landfills, because they're a net user of water. So they actually get dry. So you've got to add moisture to the landfill in order to maintain activity. We've talked to DEQ. They're very scared about putting water in an unlined landfill. And we've talked to them about creating some humidification in the air system so that we add moisture that way. The presumption is once they get comfortable with how effective this process is, we'll have better opportunities to add more moisture and control the system. This concept, next slide, this concept is being advanced in the state right now, and our team includes, of course, our team at Resource International, but also Mark Hudgens, who's got a 20-year track record in terms of aerobic landfill design, who we've been working with for over a year. And he's currently done these in the United States, Canada, and in China, actively involved in the operations of these landfills. And also Dr. Wang, who is with Virginia Tech, who in their AquaQuad laboratory, who is involved with us now. And we have been working with Dr. Wang to have submitted a grant application on behalf of one of the cities in Virginia to get a grant to do a aerobic landfill conversion on their closed landfill. They're in a similar situation. So we we're hoping to get word on a notification of our pre-proposal in March, and hopefully that will spur the opportunity to implement this kind of technology throughout the state. This particular concept is not without cost. If we go to that the landfill drawing.
The map.
Yeah. The purple lines basically give you a sense of what this might entail. On the left side of the drawing, you see the proposed air injection blower system. You need a very powerful compressor to drive the air into the landfill. We're probably talking about 50 horsepower or more and 3-phase power to push that air into the landfill so it permeates in the landfill and then can exhaust out. We're talking about 3-inch PVC pipe to distribute the gas. We're talking about injection well, 2-inch injection wells drilled maybe about 15 feet, screened to the last 5 to 8 feet that push the air into the ground. And then we're talking, the diamonds are basically passive exhaust vents, basically, that allow the air that's being pushed into the landfill and then the CO2 and the water vapor to vent out. So you're creating this cycle. The best way to explain it is, you're all familiar with compost piles, where you pile it and then you turn it over. Well, you're not turning the waste over, you're turning the gas over. And that's essentially what we're doing. We're creating a compost situation in the landfill. So you have a series of wells that are pushing air in. You have a series of exhaust vents that are releasing. You're creating aerobic conditions that create a more neutral pH. And the expectation would be then that all these waste constituents that are in these monitoring wells will start their declining trend, and basically you'll reach stabilization where they won't be producing anything in terms of contamination within 5 to 7 years of implementation. It's a active process where you can get in control, but conservatively speaking, what you see there in terms of those lines is probably something that would cost $200,000 to $300,000 to implement. So, and during that period of time where you're implementing it, you're still obligation to do the continuing groundwater monitoring program that you're doing now, which varies anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 to $50,000 a year. It's a very expensive process getting a landfill. It's a lot more expensive to close it than you ever thought. And we're just trying to figure out ways where you can get back in control, but it's not cheap.
Well, we don't have 3-phase power there, you know.
Right. Well, to drive a 50 to 75 horsepower compressor, we're gonna have to do something. We'll have to be creative. we've got the transfer station there, so I don't know what's driving those.
They got a capacitor.
It's really not.
No, it's not three-phase.
Okay.
They got a capacitor.
Yeah, so there would be options. There are options to consider, but the thing is, what's the most efficient way to deliver the energy you need to get the air in the ground?
So as a non-landfill expert, do you have any sense as to how often your market for aerobic landfills is new construction versus rehabilitation? I mean, is this almost exclusively something done to old anaerobic landfills, or are they building new aerobic landfills?
Number one, there aren't a lot of new landfills being built. Number two, depending on who's building them, the driving force has been economics. Now, one of the driving forces outside of this country is carbon credits. For instance, in Canada, there's a landfill, a closed online landfill that has been converted to an aerobic bioreactor landfill. They have substantial costs, but they also have carbon credits that are worth about $20 million. That pays for, not only for their landfill conversion, but provides the economic incentive for them to continue to advance this process. In the U.S., the carbon credits are probably worth 10 to 15% of what they are outside the U.S. But there are some people in the U.S. that have an interest in purchasing carbon credits in anticipation of the value increasing. So there is some, for the right project, there may be some financing for, someone who owns a landfill to sell their carbon credit rights for the benefit of someone coming in and putting in the infrastructure. But
does Virginia's motion towards joining RGGI have any impact on carbon credits, or is that outside of your expertise?
That's outside of our expertise.
Do you have any sense how loud a 50 horsepower blower is going to be and what impact that might have on neighbors?
I can't honestly say I do, but I know they're all encased in enclosures, but obviously those are issues. But we've got the transfer compactor station there that has some, and the traffic that has some noise. Unfortunately, there are not a lot of houses around that particular area, but that's certainly always a consideration.
Are there any concerns from DEQ in terms of, I mean, I know this isn't capped beyond soil, right? This is just topsoil? There's no cap?
There's a compacted cap on the landfill. We had certain compaction requirements. Part of the problem we have with closed landfills is when we cap them, basically we've eliminated the moisture and they stop decomposing. So you know, you got to be careful what you wish for, because and so one of the ways of getting moisture in the landfill might be, once we get DQ to a certain point, is maybe removing a portion of the cap or creating a little infiltration trenches to try and get the moisture we need to actively decompose the waste.
Are there opportunities here for methane recapture to help add to the power supply, or is this just too small?
This is just too small, yeah, and it's inconsistent right now. One of the indicators we see with respect to this landfill is not as active in decomposition as we would like, is we don't see an awful lot of settlement at the landfill. And that usually is an indication of your decomposing and your then subsiding.
And this will be my last question, I promise, but when I think of leachate, I'm thinking of metals, and when I think of composting, I'm thinking about turning over and aerobic digestion, essentially. And what I'm thinking is, we've got metal leaching in the groundwater. Now we're blowing air in. How am I not just blowing that up into the air in some way and then having it come down? I mean, and scientifically, I may be way off on how all this works. Maybe the science behind aerobic digestion does something with metals that I don't understand. But it just, if I were to explain this to a layperson constituent, how am I telling them that we've actually taken care of the metal and not just exhausted it into the air?
Well, what you're doing with the metals is, by creating the aerobic decomposition, these bacteria operate in a more neutral pH environment. When you have an acidic environment like anaerobic landfills, you have the pH, low pHs, which will actually solubilize metals. And that's what's occurring. When you get the aerobic operation going and the pH comes up, then those metals stay in the constituent attached to the inert materials that are left. And the other thing is you don't have acid liquids leaving the landfill, going into the groundwater, and then effectively leaching some of the resident metals that are naturally occurring. So you've got soluble metals appearing, and only because of the impact of the fact that the landfill is there, and not because you're leaching metals from the landfill, but you're leaching metals from the soil. But that's all measured impact. So you've got a lot of things going against you right now.
Sorry, last question. When you actually drill the wells for the air injection, the oxygen injection, what kind of redundancy do you have in place to deal with the fact that they may not have been close enough? You know, let's say you go down and you have localized areas that are doing really well, and then other areas where for some reason the oxygen's not spreading out, you're not turning over your compost pile. Like, is the redundancy such that you space them with the intent that if we get 80% of it, it's a lot better than it was, or?
Well, it certainly is. It certainly is a lot better than it was. You know, the only thing you can do before you start the process is you drill a few wells, you push air in, and you get a sense of what your densities are. You know, every landfill is different, and that's what you have to deal with in terms of how much soil the operator used to cover it, whether that soil is compacted, whether it was clay soils or sandy soils. There are lots of different things that go into a non-homogeneous landfill. And it's kind of, you might get in a situation where you have to push more air to get the airflow, or you might have to put in an additional well or something. So it's not a given. It's not like designing a chemical process where you have the tank volume and the pipes and the pumps. It's kind of, you can't pick it up and look and see what's there. So
It's kind of hit or miss.
there is some of that, but we do know the basic theory of the biology is aerobic bacteria work at a higher rate than anaerobic. They don't produce methane. They have neutral pH. They don't create the leachate.
I'm sorry to say, but I had one question.
Go ahead.
I noticed, we talked a little bit about the air. I noticed that you've got a groundwater well depicted on the diagram here. And it almost suggests to me that the groundwater would be pumped into a tank and then pumped into the ground to provide the moisture that you were referring to, and then maybe catch some of the groundwater flow and then recycle it?
That's certainly a possibility. You could even use one of your monitoring wells perhaps, or one of your abandoned wells as a source to pump leachate out of the ground. But I'd like to think that you could probably create the halo effect of improved aerobic conditions where you don't have to get into that.
Right.
And you just use well water or other supply of water to put.
Ballpark idea of how much water you would need?
No.
Or is that just kind of trial by error type thing too?
No, well, we're going to have to make some estimates during the design process to determine exactly what kind of moisture levels we want.
But it's not hundreds of thousands of gallons?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, last question. Naturally occurring bacteria, is it Nitrosamona, Nitrobacter? Do you know what kind of things are used in the aerobic process?
Anything that you can bubble air and get biological activity out of, just like a sewage treatment plant. It's just anything that's naturally occurring. In fact, when we use the humidifiers, we're basically going to bubble the air through a tank. We'll encourage the active aerobic activity to occur to get more bacteria and to continue to inoculate the system.
How many aerobic landfills in Virginia that you had used this concept and it closed? I mean, I know there's a lot of variables depending on closures because of materials and online and different things like that, and clay and stuff like that. But my question is, how many have you did this process, and how many have been closed, and how long did it take?
Miss Jessie, in Virginia, there are no aerobic landfills. Since I came to Virginia in '74, I've designed hundreds of landfills, a lot of them in Virginia, or hundreds of landfill projects, which were expansion of existing landfills. We never used an aerobic landfill in any of those processes. This came about 2.5 years ago when I saw the dilemma with the closed landfills and the people that couldn't get out of post-closure care, and we started looking for technology that maybe was out there that could change this. And in that process, one of our team members, Mark Hudgens, and I connected, who has designed landfills throughout the country. There are probably a list of about 40 in the United States, aerobic landfills, and he's designed them for clients who wanted to stop leachate production or needed to get approved to groundwater contamination. And he's, like I said, he's also designed them in Canada and in China. And when I talked to Matt originally about this concept, and when I talked to DEQ, they had the same concerns. And one of the statements that was made by Matt and DEQ is, we need another authority. And that's why we contacted Virginia Tech. And we had some meetings with them about this theory, and they were very excited. Dr. Wong is very excited. He believes this is going to work very well. And that's one of the reasons why we've put a demonstration grant together to the Environment Research Foundation. So I'm confident that DEQ is going to get on board, because they see this as a problem too, and they'd like to get out of the post-closure care business. So we're pushing hard, trying to do some cutting-edge things in Virginia.
And in the interest of full disclosure, it's because we don't have one in the state of Virginia that causes DEQ to be very uncomfortable with it, because it's not known to them. And in further interest of full disclosure, the suggestion, go to Virginia Tech and get some of the professors involved that actually train the staff at DEQ to get behind the project, may be helpful in giving them the authority or the outside authority and the comfort level they may need.
But in essence, it could take another 100 years to post-closure.
It is Virginia.
I'm just throwing it out there. It could.
Well, you know, I'm optimistic that intelligent minds will prevail. They didn't dismiss it. We had very good conversations with them, and they explained what they needed and what they wanted to see. And the first questions they asked is, we're in Virginia, don't know, where else? So they're in a show-me situation, which they should, and I think we have now the team in place to give them the hard data, and I can tell the Research Foundation that we submitted a grant application to. Part of the people on the research study program, grant administration, did their master's thesis or PhDs in aerobic decomposition, and worked with Mark Hudgens, our teammate. So we've got a lot of good things going to maybe prevail and get them on board. The other thing is the sustainable landfill concept, where you cycle back and you just keep operating a landfill in its place. You don't have to worry about closure. You don't have to worry about new areas. It's a real possibility, and it works with the concepts of global warming and climate change. So that's why they're getting a lot of carbon credits. So.
Mike, we have never had, until the last, 5 years or so, problems with 1,1-dichloroethane. And the reason we didn't is because the standard was 320, this numbers might not be exactly right, but they're in the ballpark. I think it was 327 milligrams per liter, or whatever that is measured again. Then all of a sudden, DEQ through EPA, following EPA specification, dropped it down to what, 3?
Something like that.
300 times reduction, which
made it more difficult to meet.
At this point, we're running what, 6 or 7, something like that.
I can't see the number.
On the 1,1-dichlor.
Let me zoom in.
I got it. No, I got it right.
Okay. Pete, that's a very accurate assessment.
Yes, 2.8.
Changed the benchmark, and what was acceptable, they lowered it, and now it's
100 times.
Yes, sir.
I mean,
same thing with COVID.
Yeah. So they created the issue of noncompliance by lowering the standard.
Yeah.
That's the other problem what you have with compliance and post-closure care termination is when these situations occur, it's a moving target, and suddenly you're closing in on it, and then next thing you know, they change the speed limit.
What is clean one year is polluted next.
Could be. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention and your questions, and
Well, you're not completely off the hook, I don't think. On the solar, yeah.
Yeah. We just have a very, very brief presentation on the solar possibility. That had been a question asked by several folks as far as whether or not the landfill might be a possible solar energy project site. There you see on that sheet or that page the law that was enacted by the legislature to permit landfills to install solar projects on a closed landfill. It eliminates the major permit amendment requirement and puts it down to a permit by rule, which is what that number 2 item is. Again, no major permit amendment is required, so it simplifies the process of putting a solar project on a landfill. And of course, they are required to meet all local government ordinances. Of course, the main issue with respect to a landfill and putting something that's got a foundation or at least a footer of some sort on it is stability, and whether or not you're going to have stability with respect to those foundation aspects of the panels. So the fact that yours is not settling all that much may be a good thing as far as solar goes. Again, those points I think are fairly good as far as the landfill is concerned for a solar project prospect. You have a southern facing, which is desirable. That shows you about what the range of a project might be for a 10-acre size, which is about what you would have available. Now, if you were adding land, like maybe the Thacker property to it, then maybe you can look at something a little larger. The investment tax credits are still in place if a private developer was involved. Again, you're always going to be looking to offset any electrical usage at the facility with an agreement to sell back to Dominion. And then, of course, the distance for connecting to the electrical grid is obviously a major issue there. It's just a brief opportunity. I know we have an expert in the crowd, so I don't want to stand here and say that we can answer all your questions, but I'll be happy to try.
I do have, and I'm taking you back a little bit.
Sure.
You're talking about going to the oxidation process.
Yes, sir.
Did I hear the number $200,000?
I believe so.
Are we going to get any kind of
200 to 300, I believe, was the number that was given.
That's what I was worried.
Yeah.
Are we going to get any kind of help? Are there any grants or any?
The grant that we are seeking with the other landfill client that Mike mentioned has the potential to be as much as $160,000, could be higher. So there are some significant grant monies available, but you have to fit within their particular interest. So we're hopeful that we'll hear back in March that we can proceed to the next step on that.
I don't think, Mayfield, I don't think there are a lot of grant opportunities for landfills. This particular one was very specific in terms of demonstrating somehow it's an improvement, extension of existing technologies. But general grants, like they had sewer grants for a while back for constructing systems, that sort of thing, those kinds of grants are very, very hard to find, unless we can match it somehow to law enforcement, because they seem to be successful in getting free money.
Right, you are.
But it's a difficult.
You don't think Virginia Tech would be interested in putting some money into this, since their people are quite interested in going further on it?
I thought Tech was more interested in getting people to put money into them. No, I don't. We certainly challenge everybody, and we could certainly look into that, but I'm not highly optimistic.
don't want to leave you with the false sense of hope.
Right.
Well, that's your southern facing
Right.
property right there.
And you can see on that shot, you can see where the Thacker well is in that disturbed area there. Yeah.
Any other questions?
What would be next steps?
For which one, sir?
What would be next steps for any of these sorts of projects through resource? Like what?
Sure.
Where do we move from here if we found $300,000 in the back room?
Sure. You want to talk about the aerobic?
Sure, sure. Well, then, you have two ways to go. Number one, status quo. You keep monitoring, hoping it's going to all go away. Number two, status quo allows you to watch the trending to see if it goes down, and if it goes down, then you can look at the future of implementing the Eureka, but that would mean you'd have to expand the property owner downstream of the landfill. And then the third option is maybe we need to spend budget and convert to an aerobic landfill. That you could do relatively quickly, but again, it's if you monitor for 3 years and the trends go down, you may not need a Eureka and you may not have to do anything. So it's kind of, I can't guarantee anything. The only way you can actively get involved is with the aerobic landfill. Everything else is passive. So the next step is you want to have us do a cost-benefit analysis. You do a financial projection and give you an idea what the best place to go is, then we can help you do that. But it's going to be a hard decision one way or another. Pay me now or pay me later is kind of the scenario. And I'll be honest with you, we can't predict how long the post-closure is going to go. Could go another 10 years.
Thanks.
I'm sorry. Can't be more definitive than that.
We want you to be honest, Mike, that's why.
Well, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. Alrighty, item F, Board of Equalization, Mr. Ray Koteski.
I'm Ray Koteski. I reside at 79 Harbor Landing Court, and I'm here to discuss the report that I submitted to the board. For the past year, I was a chairperson of the Board of Equalization. I was also that 4 years ago. I'm here really to discuss or to answer any of your questions and discuss the recommendations that we made. I will say that I showed this in a draft form to 4 of the board members, and they heartily endorsed everything that's in here. So it's not only my opinion, it's a joint opinion of the board itself. I'll go first to the statistics. I think they're self-explanatory. Are there any questions about the statistics themselves?
I suppose not.
All right. Okay, well, let's move on. As I say, the general observations, I'll go over them as I won't reiterate them. I think they're there. They're probably favorable in all respects with the contacts we had in the course of the hearings. Let me go to the recommendations. I think there are 3 really important ones here. The first one is that we need a comprehensive county ordinance with respect to the appeal process. Right now, there's no formal process other than what the state code tells us to do. A person calls in and they say, I want to appeal, and we say, okay, what's your name, what's your property number? And then we go on and hopefully schedule them. They don't indicate in many cases why they're coming. In some cases, they want to increase their assessment. In most of the cases, however, they want to reduce it. And that process goes on, or say our present procedure goes on for the entire year, which causes all types of administrative burdens on the county. The normal thing that occurs is if you have a reassessment, you're getting your notice in October before the effective year of the assessment change. You have an opportunity to talk to the assessors, to appeal to them. And then if that's unsuccessful and you don't like that, you have the opportunity to go to the Board of Equalization. And in some cases, some people waited a year before they decided to make their appeal. Perhaps they heard from their neighbor that, oh, you better go to the board, they're big and easy this year. Or they might say otherwise. But in any case, we met in December on 2 occasions because the people who waited until the fall, a year after they had received their change in assessment, we had to meet on December 8th and December 15th. And the consequence of that, of course, is that there's schedule changes. But not only that, when you make a change to a person's assessment, it affects their tax going back to January. So that's where the administrative burden comes in for the Commissioner of Revenue's office as well as the Treasurer's office, who are either having to reimburse people or ask for extra money at that time of the year. So I think it's real important that we today, or I'm going to ask you today, to direct the county attorney to come up with an ordinance that will provide a formal process for the submission of appeals. The code allows it. The code encourages it, in fact. I went to Matthews County because I thought perhaps they had one. I had been led to believe they had one. They do not. However, and I'm unaware of any of the localities because I haven't researched it other than Matthews. But I say the state tax department encourages it, and the state code does allow it. So that's one. And that's probably the most important recommendation. I think it will streamline the process, and it's badly needed over what we've encountered in the last 2 Board of Appeals. I might say I've been on 2 boards, as I previously mentioned. Mrs. Stevenson, one of our members, has been on 3, and the other members, and I omitted Mr. Kuntz because I knew he would get an opportunity to challenge me today if, in fact, he didn't agree with any of these recommendations. The other one is to provide for alternate members. We haven't done this in the past. For a 5-member board, the code does allow 2 alternate members to give you the opportunity to have 5 members in existence in all your meetings. Emergencies come up, schedule changes occur, and you need to have, in most cases, you need to have 5 members. We had 6 sessions. We had 17 sessions in total. We had 6 in which we had 4 members present. We had 5 in which we had 3 members present. And it's particularly difficult with 3 in the event that somebody decides to recluse themselves from a given meeting. So that's why I think that's important. And the other thing this is an encumbrance. And once again, the state tax department agrees with me on this. The fact that several years ago, in an effort to please, as the state tax department said, mom and pop, they passed a ruling that you have to wait 45 days from the time a person appeals. There has to be a 45-day waiting period between the time the letter goes out to schedule them and the time you can hear that appeal. It doesn't allow for a waiver. And as I say, that is a major encumbrance. Most of your appellants don't want to wait 45 days. In fact, later, because of the fact they have to wait for the letter. And I say there's no recourse. You have to give them that 45 days. Now, the only thing there is I would encourage you to, or someone, one of you is a member of the county's board that meets periodically, and you talk about discussions.
VACO, Virginia Association.
I think that's got to be raised here, as well as I think we need to lobby the delegate, Keith Rogers, to do something about that. Let's say, either one of 2 things: abolish that 45-day rule or allow the waiver of that 45-day rule.
Allow the applicant to waive it.
yes, allow the applicant to waive the 45. And in most of the cases, they're very willing to do it. They don't want to wait 45 days. They find out within a 10-day period that the board is going to meet, and they say, all right, well, I want to go before that board, and yet we have to turn them down and say, I'm sorry. You've got to wait 45. All right, the others are regular, are not that important, but I did want to make those 3 points. All right, any comments or any questions?
Yeah, Ray, what is the reason that they're saying you've got to wait 45 days?
They say well, first of all, when you appeal, you're supposed to show by a preponderance of the evidence that your assessment was unfair in some form or needs to be changed. And they kind of think that you need 45 days to determine that. And that's the basic reason. They feel that, and I'm quoting the state tax department individual, that mom and pa need time to prepare their appeal to come before the board.
If I may, I think it was in reaction to something that occurred in Northern Virginia where they appealed and they scheduled their hearing for the very next day. Something very extreme like that. So the state felt they needed to intervene and put a waiting period on to give people adequate time to prepare. What they've inadvertently done is they've discouraged appellants, because some appellants, as Ray has mentioned, don't want to wait 45 days. They're ready to go in 15, and they'd like to go ahead and get it over with. If I may, just real quick, Ray and I spoke about an amendment such as this after the last reassessment. It was needed then. It's needed now. The ordinance that Ray is mentioning would actually define the period of time that we have the Equalization Board sit and in panel to hear appeals. And in order to do that for the next assessment, we have to have the ordinance in place before the advertisements go out, acknowledging them of their time period in which they do have to appeal. Leaving it open in the way we do, they could get appeals right up until the bitter end, as Ray said. So I would wholeheartedly support us work on such an ordinance.
It would establish a period within which you had to make your appeal.
6 months.
It would also establish a period in which the board had to finish their actions.
Or not much, yeah.
And then it would also establish a form. We would create a form in which they would officially appeal in a written manner.
So there's some consistency.
Yeah.
I had the privilege of being on the Board of Equalization with Ray and experienced a lot of what he's talking about firsthand. Only it was my first time. Heather, do you have any reservation to working on such an ordinance?
No, sir. I've spoken, Ray's spoken to me about this, and if this is something the board thinks is necessary, I'd be happy to work on. I would seek some of Ray's input.
That was my next question. Ray, do you mind standing in and sort of reminding Heather of the issues that you and I faced in the Board of Equalization
Sure.
and making sure that we're accomplishing the mission?
Right. Yeah,
And then I
we've
have
had
a
several
motion.
informal discussions on it, and that's why I felt it was the most important recommendation that I could provide you. In looking in those statistics, I know Mr. Farrenholt earlier discussed, some of the ramifications of our actions. I think I made an unofficial calculation, and I think it amounts to the total decreases of the amount of assessments amounted to, I think, it'll be about $18,750 in actual taxes. I see Betty's over there. She's doing it right there. No.
We did that this morning.
All right. Any other thoughts or any comments you'd like to make?
I'm ready to make a motion if you'll entertain it.
Yes, sir.
I move that we ask the county attorney to create an ordinance establishing a formal process for the submission of appeals, a deadline for the submission, and a deadline for completion of the BOE's work. And then I have a second motion if that one is heard and seconded.
I'd like to.
Mr. Coons, if I may, for clarification, are you asking the board to direct me to draft an ordinance to that, or? Because it would be an ordinance that we would need to adopt to formalize that process, is what the chair is recommending.
What you said.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, so there's an amendment to that motion, so if there's a second to that.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
And I have
So ordered.
a second motion if it's necessary, and I'm sure our county attorney will let me know if it is or not. The notion of appointing members that can be at large or alternate members, it greatly addresses what Ray is telling us. If we have 5 from the 5 districts, it really makes it harder than if we had some flexibility, not only I think in recruitment, but also in ensuring closer to 5 showing up to each of these meetings. I think you said we had 17 total meetings over
We
the
had
course?
17 total meetings, 11 were short of 5 members.
And at $17 an hour, our applicant pool is pretty shallow. In fact, you get pushed a lot of times onto the Board of Equalization. Is it fair characterization?
It was a gentle push.
That was you, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, I would leave it up to you. I think a member from each district is good. And then the two others, if you decided on 2 alternates, could come at large.
I think what I'm seeking is being able to have the alternates, not necessarily to neglect one district. And isn't that what you're suggesting? Add 2 alternates?
Yes, the 5 and then 2 alternate members, which would be used in the event of an emergency or in the event that the chairperson found out in advance that one of the members or 2 were going to be absent. So then you call on these people. Right. They go to training. They would attend the training, and they'd be available on call if you, with sufficient notice to attend the meeting so that we could have 5 members.
Do we need a motion to do just that?
I think
we can write it into
4
the
years
ordinance.
hence,
Yeah.
when it becomes time for you to to develop the board and request the circuit court to designate to appoint those people, you appoint 7 people.
I think it's something that we could do by consensus and just write it into the ordinance. And I would like to add, just for the record, what the code speaks to, and it goes to great lengths to speak to it, is that they want the locality to appoint people to the Board of Equalization with real estate, construction, experience in assessing property values and or related industries. They really desire that local expertise. And we're blessed with a number of local realtors, and we were lucky enough to get a couple to agree to be on this board. And of course, people in the construction industry are also of great benefit too. That's one of the things the board really seeks, and probably something we need to give more than passing reference to in the ordinance.
Do we have a consensus for adding 2 alternates?
Yep. Yes.
Thank you.
Done.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ray.
All right, the next item was erroneously put into agency and staff reports, and it should have been in agenda items, but we'll ask Tom Taylor to come forward and have some citizen input on the compensation study, citizen response. And I'd like to say I certainly appreciate Hal Muller's efforts and your efforts on this, because we got a tough row to hoe on this budget year, and having citizens come forward with a positive plan is encouraging. So I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As
Your name and address.
Tom Taylor, 1864 Mariners Woods Drive, Hartfield. As was stated, Hal Muller and Linda Muller did the lion's share of the research for this effort. And let me say at the outset that we're in full support of the raises for the teachers. We are in opposition to the methodology that was chosen for this, and that's what I would like to discuss right now. Some time ago, the governor called on the Department of Education to come up with a methodology for addressing this subject. And the Department of Education chose VCU to come up with this methodology, which they did in 2004. And what they did was use comparison by 7 clusters. And these clusters are like entities within the comparison. And this is where we take issue with what was done in the study that the county contracted and basically recommended that it not be used. It's flawed with the starting premise in that they're comparing dissimilar commodities. Most notably, Gloucester and York County are included in the grouping as a regional group, and they're not part of the Department of Education cluster, which I've shown here on the slide. A better example of what we're talking about is the study done by Essex County, which they included in their last budget, and it shows a better comparison. What you see most notably is Middlesex on the in the middle there is on the bottom of the scale, except at the entry level. Thereafter, they are basically at the bottom of each range. Go to the next slide. Okay, we have lost, is there a graphic in there, something? A cluster analysis?
It's on down.
Oh, it's the next one after this.
Okay. If you would look to the bottom of the left side, it shows Middlesex. And these are the basic entry-level, mid-level, and 30-year level for a teacher. And below that is the average of those columns. And below that is the differential it would take Middlesex to achieve a 50% median competitiveness. We don't go into the annualized salary, and it doesn't include any of the benefit costs, such as retirement, Social Security, and Medicare. But to achieve this median, putting Middlesex in the middle of the pack, the number we come up with is 332,000. This would bring all the teachers in the 52% range. Hopefully the next, okay. Now if you go over to the right side of the chart, okay, what we see here is there's a lot of expense involved in teaching our students. And unfortunately, if you go a little bit further to the right, it puts us in the median of competitiveness with the other schools. And if you go to the very far right, the elementary schools don't fare very well at all. In fact, they're in the lower quartile. So the bottom line here is we've got a high cost of cost per student, but only average comparability within the state and within our cluster group. Could I go to the next slide? I think we want to go consultant recommendations.
Yep.
There you
Okay.
go.
Cutting to the chase, we don't understand what the 14% buys you. What does it mean? It's well beyond the differential that we were seeing. And we think it's largely due to the York and Gloucester counties being included in this measurement. It doesn't follow the Virginia state guidelines, and therefore we believe it should be invalidated. Therefore, the $596,000 that is rendered up by the 1428, we think is more appropriately the alternative assessment should be 332,000. Therefore, in conclusion, let's go one more. Okay. We agree that the teachers are underpaid. However, the schools are underperforming. These are based on the SchoolDigger.com SOL rankings. The schools, the students are in the 70th percentile within the cluster, And the composite index, as you know, impacts the teacher salary. We go to the next slide. Our objective here is to bring the teachers in comparability and into the median within the cluster, but the recommendation we've come up with decreases the 596 to 332. That's a cut of 45%, and that puts them in the median. Next slide, please. This is our recommendation on how we would achieve this, recommending to you. And I'll point out at the outset, the first three bullets do not negatively impact anybody in the county. The first one, which can be done right away, is 2% lodging tax based on 40% occupancy rate at the 3 campgrounds. This is a rather conservative outlook, and in beneficial times, it could be much higher than that as far as the output. This would then be followed in the next legislative cycle by increasing this to the 5%, and then follow this, or at the same time, institute a $2 transient fee, which would yield $367,000. Again, I say none of these first three bullets would negatively impact anyone in the county. The next item we would offer for your consideration is eliminating the land use tax, tax at the true value. This would generate roughly $400,000 in new revenue. And if a large landowner were to put their property into conservancy, this too would have a benefit to the county by taxing at the, affecting the composite rate. And the last thing, totally as a last resort, because of the extreme adverse impact it has on the lower income property owners within the county, is the increase in real estate taxes. That concludes the presentation. Are there any questions?
I just would like to thank you again for these efforts. You gave John and I a preview, so we sort of, it makes a little bit better sense on the second pass through. But I just want to thank you all, because we have no shortage of citizens that come up here and tell us what's wrong and don't offer any solutions. And I can't tell you that these will be the solutions that we'll take, but having citizens that will go to the trouble to study a problem and come up with a solution is just very encouraging, and I applaud your efforts.
We thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
All righty then, moving right along, we've got appointments, pages 90 through 95.
George Sneed. Your appointment memos submitted from the packet, I don't believe that's in there, but there are 3 openings. 2 on the Economic Development Authority. Those gentlemen would like to be reappointed, Mr. Cawthorn and Mr. Fegan. And then George Sneed has asked to be appointed to the Social Services Board. And I believe that's filling the seat that's previously held by Dennis Mead. So that's not for a full term. I can't remember what his expiration date is, but we'll certainly take care of that.
Gentlemen, what is your pleasure? The chair will accept a motion to approve those 3 gentlemen.
That we appoint.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Reappointed. And I believe we have an opening for the Pine Top District on the Planning Commission, and I've got a prospect for that I'm working on. So hopefully we'll have something by the next meeting.
Our citizen interest form is available online if any citizen's interested in participating on really any committee. We highly recommend them fill out the citizen interest form.
Very good.
Yep.
All right, moving right along, we've got budget transfer requests. And I didn't have Betty's name by this, but I'm going to put her name by it. Betty.
Taking care of the one, this is the, we spoke about this briefly in our budget work session this morning. This is to replace the walk-through metal detector over the courthouse. This is a price that was given by the, it's a state contract price to replace that unit. We can't hear you. Can you find the microphone? It's a request to appropriate $3,177.47 from the contingency line to security equipment to replace the walk-through metal detector in the courthouse.
How was that price vetted? Is that something through?
It's a state contract
Okay.
price, so it's already been vetted
Gotcha.
through the state. Their purchasing agents go out and take proposals.
I just wanted
for
to
the
ask that
equipment.
before Mr. Mansfield had to. Gentlemen, what's your pleasure?
I'll make a motion that we appropriate budget transfer 2018-2.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Mr. Mansfield. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered. All righty, moving down to item C, we've got a request to waive fees.
Guess I'll take that one too.
Thank you.
The Deltaville Maritime Museum has, John England, on behalf of the Maritime Museum, has requested that fees be waived for a building project that they have going on down there to replace the existing boat shop that's on the property. There's several permits that are involved with that project, but the total of the fees involved is $359.74.
Gentlemen?
I move that we waive the fees.
Motion duly seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered.
Thank you.
All right. Matthew, are you going to talk about the airport timber project?
Yes, sir, if I may. We received a proposal from Mid-Atlantic Tree Harvesters Incorporated that offered the county $750 for the timber located roughly in this area depicted on the map on your screen. It's a 11,000 square foot plus or minus area. It's a corner of the county property. Mid-Atlantic is doing some timbering for the adjoining property owner, Mr. Oscar Barber, and has stated that, you know, if they could timber this property while they're out there on Mr. Barber's property, they would be willing to pay us for the timber. If it was something they would have to come back and timber later, they probably wouldn't be really interested in it because of the mobilization.
We'd be charged like bringing a tree surgeon, I guess.
Our experience with timbering operations in the past have been that, unless there's a critical mass there to timber, they're really not interested in mobilizing for a small piece. It's my understanding through planning that Mr. Barber is getting the necessary permits that is needed to timber the property. And if we do have an opportunity to timber this property, I would recommend we pursue it. We would develop a very similar contract to what we had with the previous timber operation, which the board may recall is complete and was along the side of the runway, completed by Mr. William Wright, and it was this area here that we timbered to pretty much lay the trees back to provide a little bit more of a safety zone on the side of the runway. The area we're discussing is this area here. But before I can authorize a timber company to cut this timber, the board would have to, I guess, surplus the timber and authorize the purchase at $750.
Gentlemen? Trees are not friends of airplanes.
And again, we would be developing a standard contract on timber.
Well, I certainly agree with cutting timber that might possibly cause an accident, and if we get some money for it, I think that's a good thing, so yes.
Putting that in the form of a motion?
I'd put that in the form of, oh, you want me to put it in?
Somebody.
Yes, I move that we timber, there is no particular number on the area.
11,000 square feet plus or minus, $750.
Okay, 11,000 square feet plus or minus of timber, and sell it to, were we selling it to?
Mid-Atlantic Tree Harvesters. They've offered $750 for it.
For $750.
Thank you. Have a motion. Do we have a second?
Seconded.
Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I did notice that our chairman of the airport committee snuck in. He may want to comment. I'm not putting him on the spot. He's shaking his head.
He's
no.
been nodding affirmatively.
Okay.
So, all right, we have a motion duly seconded. No discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered. Thank you, gentlemen. All righty, we move into item 6, county attorney items. Ms. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have anything to report at this time.
Wow, okay. County administrator items, you have nothing to report either.
You caught Jack's disease. Actually, I have one thing. You have a copy of my report, but I want to highlight this. We have, it's my understanding, Hampton Road Sanitation is moving forward with the studies on the sewer system. The 5 areas, actually 6, because 2 are within one study, are being planned and moving forward. And I just wanted to highlight one critical aspect of this project. If the board does decide to move forward with all 6 of these projects, or the 5 with the 2 areas and 1, the debt service, estimated debt service that we would be incurring would be about $853,000 annually on those sewer projects. Now that's quite a bit of sewer project though, and it may be staggered in such a way where we move forward with 4 and then move forward with 4 additional ones at some other time. But I do want to disclose that. Now the $853,000 that's in my report is based on a 30-year term at 3.75% interest. One aspect of this project that I would like to pursue with Hampton Road Sanitation is the potential of getting USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, Rural Development involvement in this, if possible, to help get a lower interest rate. You're familiar, the Water Authority was successful in getting a 40-year term at 2%. Don't know if it's possible to do that with Hampton Road Sanitation because they treat them a little differently than a locality, but we're going to work the nuances and see if we can get their engagement and involvement. If not, we're going to be looking at the usual sources with DEQ and the Department of Health and Virginia Resources Authority funding. Many of the board members in the past have attended the Governor's Infrastructure Financing Conference along with staff. Being that this is going to be a county project partnership with HRSD, I would highly recommend when that offering comes out again that we have at least chair, vice chair, or interested members of the board be available and hopefully have some interest in attending that conference. Because the Governor's Infrastructure Financing Conference is where you have all of the potential funding institutions right there in one room and you can discuss your projects. And, well, really, that's how the water project got started at some of these conferences. So with that being said, I don't want to alarm anyone. It's quite a bit, but you're getting quite a bit for it. And it is potentially at a very high interest rate, relatively high compared to what we may be able to get. 40-year term at 2% is substantially better debt service than 30 years at 3.75. That and the only other item I had was to remind the board that the the Broadband Authority will meet on February the 21st, and I got that other thing. Actually, I have 2 things. February the 21st to reconstitute, reorganize, and discuss how they may want to move forward.
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock, yes, sir. The last thing I have is, of course, you are
What was
aware.
that date? I'm sorry.
February 21st at 6 p.m. Last item I had is, you are familiar with the EDA and the Middlesex Foundation Cook's Corner project, the economic development portion of that project, which I see our Secretary and Treasurer of the EDA is here tonight, Vice President, Vice Chair now. Yep, she's on her way to being chair. She's here tonight, I think for that reason, maybe. We're going to be in the position where the school system will be acting on a portion of the school's property at the Cook's Corner site south of the RCE cafetorium building on their meeting, or at their meeting on the 12th. They'll be surplusing that property and conveying that property to the county, at which time the county could, at their work session with the school system on the 13th, since the county, the two boards will be there together, you could receive that property on the 13th, and you could take action on conveying the front portion of that property, the RCE cafetorium building, to the EDA at that meeting. We want to be very clear because we want to discuss that, because if the board does choose to do that, we want to make sure the media knows, make sure we probably put something in the paper that the meeting is being held to receive the school's presentation, but it's also going to be doing some land transfers as well, and be held for that purpose, if that's the board's pleasure. So it's basically a three-step process. The school board will surplus and convey the property by boundary line adjustment to us. Then the board would vote to receive it, because people can't just give you property, you have to vote to receive it. Direct the council to execute the necessary deeds to do so. And then, in turn, the board would convey the property to the EDA so they can then move forward with the industrial revitalization grant for the elementary school.
Does anybody anticipate any opposition to those?
What time is that joint meeting?
I believe the budget presentation starts at 4, and then we had planned to have dinner with the school board afterwards at 6. This land transference would probably take place after the school's budget presentation's over and discussion on that is completed, and before we have dinner. So sometime around 6 o'clock.
And that's here in this bill, here.
The school board can't just give it to the EDA?
No. It's a lot cleaner and a lot better if they give it to the Board of Supervisors in the county first. And it's just the process the state, I think, has in place for how properties move from a school board and ultimately back either to the public or to another entity like the EDA.
Thank you, sir. Anybody got any questions? Anybody got any more questions of Matt?
And that's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. If not, we'll move into unfinished and new business, and Mr. Mansfield has asked to be on the agenda to discuss paper mill, water, and energy savings. Pete?
Yes. Thank you very much. Matt, do you have...
I'm pulling that up now.
You got to back out of that folder, Matt, that's all. No, you fold. Back up one.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, what we've got on here is my letter in a somewhat unfinished condition. For instance, I say governor and I don't say who the governor is. Obviously, that has been filled in, but we don't have the update yet. Turn to the next one, if you would. As you can see, if you take a look at this, this is over 15 years. DEQ and the paper mill have come to an agreement that they will drop from approximately 20 million gallons per day use of water down to 16. This is water from the Potomac Aquifer, and it's the same water you probably pull up from your well. So it's in all of our best interests not to see the use of that water expended to make paper But that's the way it is, and it's my understanding that originally it was the state that asked paper mill to use this water rather than take it out of the river. Why, I have no idea, but that's the way it is. So we're trying to cut back, and the paper mill, I think, is doing as good a job as they can. DEQ and the paper mill have decided that over the next 15 years, they can cut it down by 4 million gallons per day. The difference between what DEQ is suggesting and what Pete Mansfield is suggesting, and by the way, hopefully it's going to be the board is suggesting, because that's what I'm asking this letter to be. DEQ is waiting till the last 8 months of the 15 years to be down to 16 million gallons. I'm asking in the first 2 or 3 years to get it down. The paper mill told me that it was going to cost them approximately $4 million. So I added what the interest was by spending that $4 million in the first 3 years compared with waiting till the last. These numbers represent the interest plus the expenditure. But actually, in the end, the paper mill will save an appreciable amount of money by doing it in the first 3 years. The reason they will save that money is it costs them about 25 cents per 1,000 gallons to pump up from 600 feet in the ground and then push it along 5 miles of piping to the paper mill. If you add in the cost of the pumping, this will actually save them an appreciable amount of money, and I shall tell you how much. By this letter, Middlesex County Board of Supervisors would like to suggest a change in the timing for the implementation that DEQ has reached with West Point Rock 10 paper mill. For this reduction of 4 million gallons per day, in short, not only will the change save 18.6 billion gallons of gas. Okay, thank you. Yes, water, not gas. In short, this will save 18.6 billion gallons of water, which is 14 billion gallons more than DEQ's proposal. And it will save the paper mill $4.7 million in pumping costs. For your further information regarding this proposal, please find the attached sheet, which we just talked about, which was up there for just a second. It is disappointing that there has never been a public hearing previous to our Department of Environmental Quality's issuance of a permit that allows the industrial use of 20 million gallons per day of our public's drinking water. This proposal will reduce the paper mill's use by 17% over the next 15 years. DEQ's proposal will only lower it by 4%. I'm asking this board to agree with the letter that we're sending out, asking DEQ and the paper mill to do their work in the first 3 years rather than wait till the last 8 months.
May I ask a question? You found out from the paper mill that their anticipated costs are $4 million for making this change?
And that's a very unofficial cost because I don't really think that they have a number.
Okay. Well, they've related that to you.
It's the best number they.
How about the savings on the pumping? Have you talked to them about that to see if they're going to realize it, or if they agree that they're going to realize it?
I have not talked to them about it, but as a good mechanical engineer, I figured that out myself. Actually, it's more than 25 cents per 1,000 gallons but I use the number 25 cents per thousand.
I didn't understand what you got for a response when you, I mean, if I'm pretending I'm running a paper mill and you come to me and say, I've got a way that can save you money and you'll be ahead of compliance, I come back to you and I say, Pete, we've got a chair for you. If that's gonna work, tell me more. What other ideas do you have? So my inkling is, if this really held true in reality, why wouldn't they jump at it?
Because first of all, they don't really want to do it. They don't really want to do anything. And they're interested in putting it off as long. $3 million to the paper mill is not that big a deal to them. They really don't want to do it, but as good citizens of our area, they need to do it because it's the public's. By the way, all the codes of Virginia say that potable water shall go first for human consumption, not for making paper.
Right. My issue with the letter, Pete, is it seems like we're going squirrel hunting with a shotgun. If you were telling me that we were going after the government agency responsible for oversight, or if we were going after the plant who's letting the free market sort of dictate whether or not they're going to respond to environmental concerns, I get more interested in what the letter's actually going to do. But I think by sort of targeting multiple agencies, I just don't anticipate it doing anything. And my concern is when this body puts their signature to something, I really don't want people to start thinking, there they go again. I'd rather have them say, what can we do to respond to that? So that's my concern. I'm fully with you on my concern about the water use, about whether they're respondent to the notion that, geez, there's something we could do better. I'm even, I think, behind you in thinking that they're probably delaying it because they know that the government has given them more than adequate leeway in terms of what their withdrawal permits are. I'm just concerned that this approach gains us nothing and maybe costs us something, if that makes sense. That's me speaking for myself.
Wait a second. Your concern is what?
That your approach of writing this letter to multiple agencies and to the plant, it doesn't, I don't see it gaining us anything other than some news in the paper. And I think that could be damaging to how strong our voice is. So I'm happy to circle back with you at some point and see if we can come to a different solution as to maybe we can get a meeting with the plant and maybe we can run down the notion that, oh heck, if that savings are really there, we'll do it. And maybe they'll push back and say it isn't 25 cents per 1,000 gallons, but I would rather go to that trouble with the plant, or if in discussions with you and others, I'd rather go to the authority having jurisdiction and maybe work on embarrassing them into the fact that you're letting them take out a crap load of water that none of us small individual residents can have an impact on. This is your one chance and you're giving them a free pass for a long time. I'd rather one of those two approaches rather than just a letter that makes you and I feel like we're doing something, but in the end probably isn't going to yield any results. That's my one opinion.
Yeah, I have had several meetings with the environmental people at Rock 10, and you go and they even offer to pay for your lunch, and they like the idea, they think it's a great idea, and that's the end of it. You really don't hear anything further.
Have we sent a letter before this proposed letter? Haven't we sent something to them before now?
No, we as a group, not to my knowledge.
Mr. Chair, I would ask to review the record on that, because I remember this board directed us previously, we have done letters.
You did say.
And we sent with this proposal, but it did not include your worksheet, Mr. Mansfield. I only remember that because I was involved with Ms. Muncy. We were trying to get that out the door, but my memory's not always best, so I would defer to what the record says on that.
May I make a recommendation? I think John's got a good idea. Maybe one more meeting with the paper mill to talk with them about this approach would be in order. Maybe we could schedule that with some of the paper mill staff. I'd be happy to do that. And not just because they're offering to buy us lunch.
Yeah.
Well, we can buy our own lunch.
That's what brought me on board, but maybe that's, I can get behind you if I go and experience the same thing and they tell me to pound sand. Well, that may change my
By the
opinion.
way, they have never told me to pound sand. They've always been just nice as you could possibly be. And as you shut the door, that's the last you hear of it until you...
Pete, would you be comfortable putting this letter, which it sounds like it's similar to a letter that's already gone out, would you be comfortable putting that to bed for now if you and I can get another meeting with Rock 10 and see if we can go a different channel? Because I am responsive to the issue you're calling attention to. I'm not responsive to the manner by which we're pursuing it.
By the way, when you talk about 4 million, I think over the period of time, instead of an average of 19.2 million gallons per day over the 15 years, we'll get it down to 16.3. That is 5 times more water than what we're talking about pumping in Middlesex County. This is,
Well, in you all's meeting, would you address the savings and pumping costs? Because as a business person, if I've got a choice of spending $4 million this year or spending $4 million 10 years down the road, I'm going with 10 years down the road.
you will, but I've included that in here, Chip.
I know you have.
Yeah.
But there need to be those savings that they recognize and realize in order to have them incentivized to move on it.
Well, and if nothing else, if you can get them to say, well, I agree with your assumption there, I agree with your assumption there, and at the end they start saying, well, there's a project with a really 1-year payback or less, okay, then why aren't you doing it? Let's call put your feet to the fire. If it's a good payback project, you have the capital, you have access to the capital, and it's going to improve your community reputation, why aren't you doing it? And I mean, I'm not sure this is going to be a much better solution, but I'll certainly be more prepared to write a letter next time if I find similar to what you've.
If I'm hearing this correctly, John, you and Pete are willing to go and have a meeting in lieu of the letter for now.
If there's lunch.
If free lunch is involved. Is that satisfactory, Pete?
Gotta hold
Yes.
through.
Okay.
Make them take you to Georgia.
We're trying anyway. I mean, I know you've been there talking to them, but just my personal opinion, I think that Rock 10 have their mind in doing certain things their way, and there may be a reason why they're doing it that you're not privy to, and it's no harm. You may get a free lunch out of it, but that's about it. But I'm thinking they're set and got schedules and different things. And then they're gonna say, what makes you the expert at saying what you saying on this paper is gonna be right? 15 years now. These are speculations, and there's a lot of variables that hit into these numbers.
Yeah.
That you have no idea, nobody have any idea 15, 16 years down the road what different costs are.
By the way, I would like to answer what you're saying.
Well, but I know you know. I'm not saying, I'm not denying that you know your numbers and you're an engineer. I'm not saying that you don't know what you're doing. But I'm just saying you got to have all your variables when you're negotiating, and you got to get all your information. Which this here, you don't have all your information from the company.
But less than 10% of the numbers that you see there are Pete Mansfield's numbers. Those are numbers that, for instance, how fast it can be done under the DEQ method that's somewhere between DEQ and the paper mill came up with those numbers. Now, just look at what happens. For the first 10 years, say, or 9 years, or however many that is, notice all those zeros. They haven't done a damn thing. They're sitting there doing nothing.
So I think we have a temporary path forward, and Wayne, I respect your comments, but I mean, for me, Aaron Brockovich wouldn't have moved Southern Cal Edison without somebody actually calling him out.
And we'll have some actual data to debate once you all have had your.
Maybe. Wayne might be right.
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see. But the two of us are willing to do it, so there we go.
Is that satisfactory, Mr. Mansfield? Is this?
Yeah. Look, I would just like to, in the end up with some action. even if we don't get it this year, you know, we don't look at 10 years of doing nothing.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Is my big
All right.
problem.
Did you have any other unfinished business?
No, I thought that was.
No, did you have any other?
Comments and reports.
Mr. Jesse, you got any? I do not have any unfinished.
I just wanted to update my constituents that are probably watching online or however we're watching on TV. I did have, is this where I talk about what meetings I had?
No.
Well, then I don't have unfinished business. And I misread the agenda.
And we'll go
That's
back
why I
the other
moved to
way
the
and
agenda.
ask you if you've got any new business. What you were getting ready to talk about?
No
the
new
supervisor's
business,
comments.
well, let me mention the meetings that I had. Obviously,
no.
nope.
That's under your comments. This is unfinished and new business.
Standing by
That's
for
why I pulled up
comments.
the agenda again, John.
Nothing new for me, Wayne?
Nothing new for me.
I know, but we're moving on.
Nothing new? Okay, now we get into supervisors' comments and reports. Mr. Queens.
Gosh, I really wanted to talk about this to all three of you and all the people at home. I did attend 3 budget working sessions. I visited the regional jail and was very impressed with the operation that Tim Doss and his staff are running there. I've had meetings with Dr. Gretz and Lud Kimbrough and high school principal Susan Fleet and athletic director Matt Stam about potentially having a sailing team at the high school. That was brought to me by Lud Kimbrough. Very exploratory right now, but there's some interest, and it seems like, with Christ Church down the road doing place-based learning and being surrounded on 3 sides by water, we should at least be considering a sailing club, especially if there might be some boats that could be donated, which there might be. I met with Chip and a couple constituents at Chip's home. Thanks for that, Chip. We were able to hear from constituents about the budget and their views on some of the issues that are obviously facing the county in terms of funding. Also met with Johnny Fleet. So I've got a couple different perspectives on some of the same issues, including land use taxes, and also the Friends of Middlesex County Public Schools lighting project and its current status. So I was happy to get updates on that. As you know, I don't even know what part of the agenda we're on, so I'm still coming up to speed on different things that are going on in the county. And I then met with Dr. Gretz again to talk about where he thought we stood on the lighting project as well, and it was helpful to hear, not that there are sides forming, but just everybody's perspective, because this is starting to be an old story. And finally, I met with the YMCA's Rosa Beth Kissman and talked about what initially I thought would be having one of us join the YMCA board so that we could guarantee more accountability and hopefully streamline some of the funding that we've historically been able to streamline. She did arm me with some facts that differ from some of the others that I've been told exist about how many counties provide block grant funding to YMCA's, but moreover, what we more importantly got to was basically the notion that we don't really want a board member per se. Let's say I were to volunteer and say I'll be on the board. Rather, we want to have sort of an at-large position, and I can't remember what term she used, but the point was there would be a board member welcome, but if we appointed somebody to the YMCA board officially, that person would then have to recuse themselves from votes at this level at the supervisors. So she's suggesting that the YMCA board position be something that any of us can attend, and I'll make the same deal that I was willing to make anyway, which is I'll make a point of, since that's in my district, attending as many of those meetings as possible. And I'll try to make these reports shorter in the future.
That's all right. It just shows that you've got a lot of activity going on, and that's what we want to hear about.
Could I, let's say you did go on the board, would you then have to recuse yourself?
That was Rosabeth and YMCA's interpretation, that if I became on their board and was involved in any decisions as to what funding requests they make of the supervisors, then if it came up here, I would have to recuse myself as somebody standing at that side making a request as part of the board of the Y. That's how I understood it.
I think the only way you would have to recuse yourself is if you had a direct financial interest in the Y. Like if you had a certain amount of income from the Y, but board members have served on boards and voted on subject. I mean,
I think if it comes down to YMCA's comfort level, either solution is workable, so there's no need to really bust our heads on figuring it out. I think, and the other thing that should be noted is Rosabeth was really pleased to be made aware that the Board of Supervisors is taking an interest at this level, so that we can get past some of this and move forward.
I will save mine until last. Slip over to Mr. Jesse.
Already, I did attend the PDC. The company that they hired, Advantage, they have really gone and done a good job at this point in time. There was also a Senate Bill 639, which was a watercraft fuel tax that was there, and it was just building up. And I think it was it was Senator Lewis came up with that, and it was money there. So with the dredging of waterways with Senator Hodges, they were looking at it, that's money to dredge out a lot of these ports. So that's what they're looking at, and they're going to put that bill up. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Did I miss anything on that? I don't know if anything else to put on.
I think Mindy Moran, Mindy Connors now, County Administrator Matthews, along with the lobbyists that were secured by the MPC, the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission, were very successful in helping Keith get that. It was a really good day for the Middle Peninsula General Assembly.
Because I think it was somewhere around $7.5 million, wasn't it?
It was substantial.
Of taxes that were there and wasn't going anywhere. Wow. And they looked at it and they wanted to make sure that they could get a hold of that before Virginia Beach or somebody picks up on it and want to get that money. So that was a plus on that.
It's a very good day.
Yes. And I did turn the Middle Peninsula Alliance. This just talk about the website is up and running, and they're getting a lot of hits on the website. And also they thank Sands and Anderson about the 14 localities that passed the Pomonkey Net and Go Virginia, which the General Assembly going to have to vote on that. So I hope that goes through. And that was with my committee report.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mansfield?
I'm good.
Okay. This last month, I attended my first emergency services meeting. We had a good water authority meeting, had a joint budget and finance meeting with the schools, and then the meeting that John alluded to that we have the citizens on the compensation. So I think we all had a pretty busy month. And if that concludes our comments and reports, item number 10 is to move in.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recommend we move that to later in the meeting, because if the board doesn't go to dinner now, you may not get back by the public hearing time of 7 o'clock.
In that case, the closed meeting will be moved to the evening session.
You need to vote on it.
I move that we move the closed meeting to the evening session and recess.
Second.
And recess. Second. Okay. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. They call into session the 7 o'clock session public hearing. And let me see, Betty, you're going to talk to us about the amended fee schedule for solar application?
Actually, David is here.
David?
He couldn't stand it.
Since he's here.
Says I'm here.
I told him if he was here, I wouldn't do it.
As we discussed last month, we have advertised for public hearing the change in the fee schedule to reflect the residential photovoltaic system for $50 and commercial photovoltaic systems for $1.50 per DC kilowatt generated. The $50 fee, when it was originally put in, was tailored to residential. You know, this is just kind of a one-shot deal, and the $50 will in no way cover our cost or operating expenses for a solar farm. So that's what this is all about. Got any questions? I'll be glad to address them for you.
This also, it's a public hearing. After we got to close it, then we have to
Okay. You ready?
All righty, so. Is there anything from, that is the presentation from staff?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So I'll now open the hearing for comments from the public. Guess we'll close the public comment period. Let me see. Any questions and discussion from board?
Yeah, I would like for David to come back. I would like to ask him a question with,
Yes, sir.
now, so the $50 also if you want to put it on your home?
That's, yes, for residential. Yeah,
Residential home, that's
that's
what
for
I'm
your
saying.
home.
So when they do that, do you come and inspect to see that the roof is heavy enough to support the weight?
Part of the submittals is a structural and evaluation of the structure.
Evaluation. Oh, that's what I was just wondering.
Yeah, and solar panels generally run somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 pounds per panel. So, you know, they're not extremely heavy. And most of the trusses are designed to more than take care of that.
They do, even just thinking for weight of snow and everything too?
Well, that's included in part of the dead load.
That's included in the formula or whatever you have to use to do that?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what it's evaluated for, is take care of the dead load and snow loads and so forth, and weight of the shingles or roof covering and so forth.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Any other questions? Do we have a motion to adjust the fee?
I move that we adjust the fee per the recommendation of our building inspector.
Second it.
Have a motion?
Yeah, what is the recommendation?
$50 for residential, $1.50 per DC kilowatt generated for commercial.
Solar farms and that sort of thing.
That is Pete's monitor not working?
Okay, this is the only thing we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Right here, not the other
This is monitor?
is
She's
already.
seeing it.
Yeah, the other's already in, yep.
Okay.
We're just adding that.
Yeah, because we've had trouble with that thing.
Thank you.
No,
All right, we have a motion and a second. We've had a little bit of discussion. Is there any further discussion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. So ordered. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
All right, our second item of business is the capital improvements plan, and I've got David Kretz's name beside that.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board,
Good evening.
and staff.
You're fine. Just say
Don't want to leave our
back.
staff out, our fellow workers. What the board is here to consider tonight is adopting the fiscal year 2018, sorry, is that better? Thank you. 2018-2022 capital improvements plan. This is something that the Planning Commission just passed last month. Of course, what is the capital improvements plan? It's strictly an advisory document for the board. Plan is intended for use as a capital facilities planning document. It is not request for funding allocations or a county capital budget. CIP is intended as a planning tool to assist the Board of Supervisors in the development of the county budget. Once the CIP is adopted, individual project priorities may change throughout the course of the year. It's quite possible that a certain project may not be funded during the year indicated on the CIP, or even at all. Of course, why are we here? State code authorizes us to do this, assigns the responsibility of planning for the capital outlay programs to the local planning commissions. Code states that the local commission may, at the direction of the governing body, shall prepare and revise annually capital improvement program based on the comprehensive plan of the county or the municipality for a period not to exceed the ensuing 5 years. In accordance with the code, the CIP is to be updated on an annual basis with individual projects removed from plan as they are completed. This update to the capital improvements plan was developed in accordance with this section. The Planning Commission's Capital Improvements Committee met on December 28th to prioritize departmental requests as they were received. This plan is the result of that work and comes to the Commission with the CIP Committee's recommended prioritization. Excuse me. This is an update to the previous adopted capital improvement plan and may contain some new projects. I'd like to note that we gathered our committee together rather quickly. They did a great job of stepping to the plate. We had this meeting between Christmas and New Year's, and all but one member was there, and he submitted his information separately, so I have to commend our committee for stepping up and getting that done. As a result, the Planning Commission, after conducting a public hearing on January 11th, 2018, recommended unanimously with one member absent approval of the FY 2018, FY 2022 capital improvements plan as submitted. Now, Mr. Walker, if you would pull up let's start with the inventory
Okay.
of facilities. I'm just going to go through that briefly. Hey, there's a lot of minimized files down there. It'd probably take a second or two. Last year, this was kind of handed to me at the last minute. Wally Horton, our previous planning director, had pretty much put things together, and I basically carried it to the board. When I started looking at our facilities inventory, I noticed that there was a few that were missing, and we looked like there were some that were added in that probably shouldn't have been there. This is going to be a work in progress. You'll notice quite a few revisions to this. I've worked on it. Of course, some of this is tied into my work with the Public Access Authority. I'm becoming more familiar with the county property, so I'm probably the best one to go through this and try to fix it. It's a lot closer than it was. So you'll see, of course, a notable addition is our new property we obtained at Free Shade. Our property down at Jackson Creek is also added in here. So I will continue to work on this inventory list to try to update it and get it even more accurate than it was before. But it certainly is a lot closer than it was. So, Matt, I think, anybody have any questions on that portion of it while it's up there? Okay. All right. Now, we have the capital improvements plan itself. It's basically, I have this up there too. I think you'll notice in my staff report, there wasn't a lot of comment on it. You'll see by the scoring that some of I just made this note in the staff report, and I just wanted to convey this to the board. Some of the commission members felt that some of these almost maintenance items like roof construction and HVAC systems at the school, that maybe the board should take a little bit more consideration with these, and they mentioned some of the facility failures across the country with school systems and their actual facilities having trouble maintaining these structures and whatnot. Maybe the board might consider additional thought and maybe move these up as to a little bit higher priority. They tended to have mediocre scores in this scoring. As you can see, they were kind of middle ground scores, but they felt that was basic communication. They didn't take official action on that. It wasn't within, they approved the budget as it was, but I just felt that the board should probably have some of the thoughts that the Planning Commission had at that meeting and make sure that the board members are aware of those thoughts and get those conveyed to the board members. Other than that, they really didn't have any issue with any other of the items. These were done by the committee members. The committee's made up of 2 Planning Commission members and 3 members of at-large members of our society. So, are there any questions on anything? If so, I'll just step back and let you open up the public hearing on it.
Thank you, David.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, we'll open up the public comments. Seeing and hearing none, we will close the public comments and open up for question and discussion by board members.
My only question is, the largest item on here is number 3, Middlesex High School renovation. It's $8.8 million. If we really mean to consider that, shouldn't we already be planning on architects and whatnot? And if in the face of all the other things we're considering in the county right now, why would we hold that? And I understand it's a plan and where it's not binding, but maybe we should push that further out or split it up or interface with the schools and understand what their more real intent is. If we really don't mean to spend $9 million next year, why are we holding it? And that's just a question. I'm open to answer, interpretation, what have you.
Yes, Mr. Coons. Dr. Gretz, when he submitted that he does have an architect's he has some basic cost estimates on this. I think and Matt, if you correct me if I'm wrong, I believe he mentioned that he needs to really get additional estimates from architects. That when you get into that next phase, you have to kind of really have a little bit more input. There has to be more. You really have to start spending money. That's correct.
It came up at a joint budget and finance committee meeting with the schools back in the fall, if my memory serves, and we discussed it a little bit. I think Dr. Pete said really it's gotten about as far as he can go without getting an architect on board to look at it. But I'm not 100% sure they know where they want to take that project at this point in time. That would be a good question we can ask the schools when we meet with them on Tuesday.
Okay.
I had a question on the MES rooftop unit replacement and the roof repair. These are the projects that the Planning Commission was concerned about?
So those were those might even look more like a maintenance type of issue rather than a capital improvements. Evidently, there's some issues with some of these that they've conveyed to us. So it seems like members of the community were more concerned about it than actually maybe Dr. Pete was at some of the meetings.
We've heard quite a little bit about the elementary school roof leaking for quite some time.
Right.
The question I have, and we've seen some preliminary numbers come from the schools at our joint budget work session we have with them. But am I correct to understand that the MES rooftop unit replacements, multi-year, spread over a course of 5 years, it looks like, to a total of about $900,000 to replace the carrier rooftop unit?
That would have been what was submitted.
Did he present that to the?
That would have been in his submittal package.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like in his project. Okay. So they've spread that over 5 years.
Any other questions?
Any further discussion or questions? I suppose the chair would entertain a motion to approve the capital improvements plan as submitted.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the FY 2018 through 2022 Middlesex County Capital Improvement Plan as submitted.
Thank you, sir. I have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion that is duly seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, we'll call for the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. So ordered.
One quick item, Mr. Chairman and gentlemen of the board. I just did a quick review of the capital improvements plan, and 7 projects would be touched or completed under this next budget that we've preliminarily started reviewing as of this morning. You could make a case for 9 if you count sewer and the Cook's Corner water complex that's underway, but under a little separate.
At what point did you want to comment about the activities of the 12th and 13th? Was that at this point or another point?
Well, before we adjourn, but just real quickly, we only have one member of the public here tonight, and he knows, but I just want to make sure that we disclose that the board's going to be receiving land at the school board and board of supervisors joint work session, where you receive their budget presentation on February the 13th. You're going to be receiving properties from the school board. They're going to be conveying properties to you that encompass some properties to the south of the RCE building. And in turn, the board will be conveying a portion of the front of the Coach Corner property around the RCE cafeteria building to the EDA at that meeting.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All righty then. We've got two more items left. One is the closed session and then the public comments. Do we wait and come back from closed session for public comments or offer them up
It's your
now?
pleasure. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take. And
Well, I'll go ahead and open the meeting to public comment.
it may be courteous to Bob if he's wanting to make a comment, so we wouldn't have to wait.
I just want to say one thing.
We don't know how long we're going to be in there is why.
Yeah, that's why, yeah, I know. You guys get pretty long-winded here. You know, I have a question now, looking at all this amount of money that this county is spending. And it's mind-boggling to me. You know, we've seen the audit done on the finances in this county. But what I personally would like to see done is a audit, individual audit, I should say a independent audit done for the financials for this county of Middlesex. Now, I know this, we've already done an audit on this county, but to me personally, I would like to see a independent audit done on the financial accounting for this county. I can't see this county spending all this money or having all this money to spend. I've read the reports. I've seen the reports, but it's hard to believe. And every year is the same report from the audit company, audit associates. We are in very, very good financial situation, very good standards. To me, that's hard to believe. But I'm just saying, I would just like to see an independent audit done on the books for Middlesex County. That's all I got to say. And Matt, if you don't mind, I'd like to see you before you go into session.
Absolutely.
Thank you, board. Thank you, sir.
Since it's Bob, and he is the only public here, can I just respond real quick?
Yes.
The Robinson Farmer Cox audit, they are an independent audit firm. They're not employees of the county other than they're contracted with us. So they are bound by independent auditing guidelines to provide a completely non-biased independent audit. That's actually required by law that we have an independent audit. So Robinson Farmer Cox, even though we contracted with them to do the audit, they are an independent auditor. That's all.
Mr. Chairman, is that the close of the public comment period?
If there is no other public comment, which I feel safe in assuming, since there's nobody else left, we will close the public comment, period. And then we need to entertain the motion to go into closed session.
I move we go into closed session.
She has to read the long drawn-out thing.
2.2-37.
Sorry, Mr. Green.
No worries.
If you would prefer to do it, I'll be happy to have the language prepared for you, though.
No, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we need a motion from the board to convene in a closed meeting pursuant to the Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A1. This is for discussion of matters involving personnel for contracts of the county administrator and the county attorney, and pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711A3 and A8. This is for discussion and/or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose and for consultation with legal counsel.
So moved.
Second. Motion, second. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We are now in closed session.